Scary telling.
As a biologist, I love all of my animals. But I sometimes wonder to myself if any of them still remember that they used to be human. It's a strange thought that haunts me whenever I work late in the zoo, feeding the animals or checking on their well-being. One evening, after a long day at work, I decided to stay a bit longer and finish some paperwork. The zoo was almost empty, with only the sounds of nocturnal animals filling the air. Suddenly, I heard a strange whisper coming from the other side of the reptile house. Curiosity getting the better of me, I followed the sound. As I approached the reptile house, I saw a shadowy figure standing outside the door. It was a woman, with long hair and a tattered dress. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to hide my fear. "I used to work here," she said. "I was one of the keepers. But I died, and now I'm trapped here, along with all the other lost souls." I didn't know what to say. I had heard stories about strange things happening in the zoo at night, but I had never believed them. "What do you mean, lost souls?" I asked. "The animals," she said. "Some of them used to be people, just like you and me. But they were transformed into animals, and now they're trapped in their bodies, unable to communicate or remember their past lives." I didn't know what to say. It sounded like a crazy conspiracy theory, but the woman seemed so sincere. "Is there anything I can do to help?" I asked. "There might be," she said. "But you have to be careful. The zoo is not what it seems. There are dark forces at work here, and they will stop at nothing to keep their secrets hidden." With that, she disappeared, leaving me alone in the dark. I tried to shake off the strange encounter and went back to my paperwork. But I couldn't stop thinking about what the woman had said. Were there really lost souls trapped in the bodies of the animals? And what dark secrets was she referring to? As the night went on, I felt increasingly uneasy. Every sound made me jump, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. But nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and I started to think that maybe I had imagined the whole thing. That was until I heard a low growl coming from the primate house. It sounded like no animal I had ever heard before, and it sent shivers down my spine. I cautiously made my way towards the source of the sound, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. The monkeys were gathered in a circle, staring intently at something in the middle. As I approached, I saw that it was a small statue, made of what looked like bone. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before, and I felt a strange urge to touch it. But before I could even get close, the monkeys suddenly turned on me, baring their teeth and screeching. I stumbled back, shocked by their sudden aggression, and fell to the ground. When I looked up, I saw the statue hovering in the air, surrounded by a strange green mist. And then, without warning, it vanished, leaving me alone with the angry primates. I stumbled out of the primate house, shaken and terrified. I knew that something was not right in the zoo, and I needed to find out what it was before it was too late. The next day, I decided to do some research on the history of the zoo. I spent hours poring over old records and newspaper clippings, trying to find any information that could shed light on the strange occurrences of the night before. Finally, I came across a mention of a cursed artifact that had been discovered on the grounds of the zoo many years ago. According to the article, the artifact was believed to be responsible for a series of unexplained deaths and disappearances in the area, and it had been buried deep beneath the zoo in the hopes of containing its power. But as I continued reading, I realized that the artifact had never been found. And suddenly, everything started to make sense. The strange whispering, the lost souls, the aggressive animals. It was all connected to the cursed artifact. Determined to put an end to the chaos, I began to search the zoo for any sign of the artifact. I spent hours exploring every corner of the grounds, but I found nothing. Just as I was about to give up, I heard a voice whispering my name. It was the woman from the night before, beckoning me towards the aviary. When I arrived, I saw that the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and was met with a blast of cold air. The aviary was empty, except for a single cage in the corner. Inside the cage, I saw a bird unlike any I had ever seen before. It was black as night, with eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. As I approached, the bird spoke to me in a voice that was both human and animal. "Take me to the artifact," it said. "Only I can help you destroy it." Without thinking, I reached into the cage and took the bird in my hands. And then, without warning, everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in a dark underground chamber. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and I could hear the sound of dripping water echoing through the room. I looked around, trying to get my bearings, and saw that the bird was perched on my shoulder. It looked at me with its glowing eyes and spoke again. "This is where the artifact is hidden," it said. "But beware, for it is guarded by the souls of the dead." I took a deep breath and approached the center of the room, where I saw a pile of rubble and debris. As I got closer, I realized that it was covering an opening in the ground. With the bird still on my shoulder, I started to clear away the rubble. It took me hours, but finally, I saw a glimmer of something beneath the debris. It was the cursed artifact. And it was more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The artifact was a small, intricately carved figurine made of what looked like bone. But as I picked it up, I felt a strange energy coursing through my body. And then, as if on cue, I heard the sound of shuffling feet. I turned around and saw a group of figures emerging from the shadows. They were the lost souls that the woman had spoken of. They looked like animals, but their eyes were human, and I could see the pain and sorrow etched into their faces. As they approached me, I felt a sense of overwhelming dread. But the bird on my shoulder spoke again. "Use the artifact," it said. "Destroy it and free these souls from their eternal torment." With a deep breath, I raised the artifact above my head and brought it down with all my strength. There was a deafening crack, and then a blinding light. When I opened my eyes, I saw that the room was empty. The souls were gone, and the artifact had been reduced to dust. I stumbled out of the chamber, the bird still perched on my shoulder. And as we emerged into the sunlight, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The curse had been lifted, and the zoo was safe once again. As I made my way back to the main zoo entrance, I realized that the bird was still perched on my shoulder. I turned to look at it, and it spoke to me once more. "You have done well," it said. "And for that, I will grant you one wish." I was taken aback by its words. A wish? Was this some kind of trick? But then, I thought of all the possibilities. I could wish for anything I wanted: fame, fortune, love. And yet, as I stood there, I realized that there was only one thing I truly desired. "I wish to know the truth," I said, looking into the bird's glowing eyes. And with that, everything went dark again. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my lab, surrounded by my animals. But something was different. I could see them in a new light, almost as if they were speaking to me. As I looked into their eyes, I realized that they were no longer just animals. They were something more. And then, I remembered the bird's words. Do any of them remember that they used to be human? I had asked. And now, as I looked at my animals, I knew the answer. They all remembered. And they were waiting for me to set them free. Yesterday I wrote the number 69 on my wrist as a joke. I don't know why I did it, but it seemed funny at the time. I showed it to my friends, and we all had a laugh. But now, today, something strange has happened. The number is 68, and now it's not washing off. At first, I thought it was just a smudge, but when I tried to wash it off, it wouldn't come off. I scrubbed at it with soap and water, but it was as if the number had been tattooed onto my skin. I started to panic, thinking that maybe I had used a permanent marker by mistake. But then I remembered that I had used a regular pen, not a marker. And even if it was a marker, it shouldn't have been able to stain my skin so deeply. I tried using rubbing alcohol, but that didn't work either. The number was still there, mocking me with its ominous presence. As the day went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The number felt like a weight on my wrist, and every time I looked at it, I felt a shiver run down my spine. I tried to ignore it, but it was always there, taunting me. Eventually, I decided to do some research online to see if anyone else had experienced something like this. I found a few forums where people were talking about similar things happening to them, but no one had any answers. Some people said that it was just a weird coincidence, while others speculated that it was a sign of something more sinister. I tried to convince myself that it was all just a coincidence, that there was nothing to be afraid of. But as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The number was still there, staring at me with its cold, unfeeling gaze. And I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. The next morning, I woke up to find that the number on my wrist had changed again. This time it read 67. I was starting to get really freaked out by now. How could a number just change on its own like that? I had never heard of anything like this before. I decided to see a doctor to get their opinion on what was happening. I made an appointment and went to the clinic. The doctor examined my wrist and said that he had never seen anything like it before. He prescribed a special cream that was supposed to help remove the stain, but even that didn't work. The number just kept changing, each day a lower number than the day before. I felt like I was being counted down to something, but I had no idea what. The number was starting to take over my life. I couldn't focus on anything else, and I was constantly checking my wrist to see what it said. One day, I was walking home from work when I noticed that the number on my wrist had changed again. This time it read 24. I stopped dead in my tracks, feeling a cold sweat break out on my forehead. What did this mean? Was something going to happen when the number reached 0? I started to feel like I was losing my mind. Everywhere I looked, I saw the number 24. It was on license plates, street signs, and even on the clock. It was like the number was following me, taunting me. That night, I had a dream about the number. In the dream, I was in a dark room, and the number was there, glowing in the darkness. It was counting down, and I knew that when it reached 0, something terrible was going to happen. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. I knew that I couldn't keep living like this. I had to find out what was happening to me and put a stop to it before it was too late. I spent the next few days trying to research the origin of the number. I dug through history books, ancient texts, and even visited a few psychics, but I couldn't find any answers. No one seemed to know what the number meant or where it came from. As the days went by, the number continued to count down. It was now in the single digits, and I was starting to lose hope. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, and I couldn't escape. One day, I received a package in the mail. It was a small box wrapped in brown paper with no return address. I hesitated for a moment before opening it, but my curiosity got the best of me. Inside the box was a small, silver key. It was old and rusted, but it had a strange energy about it. It felt like it was calling out to me, like it was meant for me. I didn't know what to do with the key, but something inside me told me that it was important. I decided to keep it with me at all times, hoping that it would somehow provide me with the answers I was looking for. As the countdown continued, I started to feel like I was losing control. The number was like a monster that was slowly devouring me, and I didn't know how to stop it. I was constantly on edge, my nerves frayed. One night, I was lying in bed, staring at the number on my wrist. It was now down to 3. I felt like I was running out of time, that something terrible was about to happen. Suddenly, I heard a knock at my door. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I hesitated for a moment before getting up to answer it. When I opened the door, there was no one there. But on the ground, I saw a small piece of paper. It had a single word written on it in bold, black letters, "Run." I felt a shiver run down my spine as I read the word "run." It was like someone knew what was happening to me and was trying to warn me. I looked around, but there was no one in sight. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I went back inside and locked the door behind me. I felt like I was in danger, but I didn't know who or what was after me. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that it was just a prank or a coincidence. But then, I heard something moving in the other room. It was a faint sound, like someone was shuffling around. My heart started to race as I slowly made my way towards the sound. As I got closer, I realized that the noise was coming from my bedroom. I pushed open the door and saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on the wall, was a countdown clock. It was just like the one you see in movies, with big red numbers counting down the seconds. But this one was real, and it was counting down to 0. I felt a surge of panic as I looked at the clock. I knew that when it reached 0, something terrible was going to happen. But what could I do to stop it? I looked around the room, searching for any clues. That's when I noticed something odd about the clock. There was a small keyhole on the side, just big enough for the key I had received in the mail. I fumbled with the key, trying to fit it into the lock. It was old and rusted, and it didn't want to turn. But I persisted, twisting and turning the key until it finally clicked. The countdown clock stopped, freezing at 1 second. I let out a sigh of relief, feeling like I had narrowly escaped disaster. But then, something strange happened. The clock started to rewind, the numbers ticking backwards until they reached 0. And then, there was a loud bang. I looked around, trying to figure out what had caused the noise. That's when I saw it, a portal opening up in the middle of my room. I felt like I was in a trance as I walked towards the portal. It was like something was pulling me towards it, like I had no control over my actions. And then, I stepped through the portal. As I stepped through the portal, I found myself in a dark and eerie place. It was like nothing I had ever seen before, a realm of shadows and whispers. I tried to move, but my feet felt like they were glued to the ground. I looked around, trying to make sense of my surroundings. That's when I saw them. The ghosts. They were everywhere, flitting about like shadows in the night. Some were pale and translucent, while others were dark and menacing. I wanted to scream, to run away, but I was frozen in fear. The ghosts started to converge on me, surrounding me on all sides. I felt their cold, clammy fingers brushing against my skin, their breath whispering in my ear. It was like they were trying to communicate something to me, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. And then, I saw her. A woman, dressed in a flowing white dress, with long, dark hair cascading down her back. She was different from the other ghosts, more solid, more real. She approached me, reaching out a hand. I felt drawn to her, like I knew her from somewhere. She spoke, and her voice was like a soft breeze. "I am the one who brought you here," she said. "I needed your help." I didn't know what to say. I was still in shock from everything that had happened. But something about her made me trust her, made me believe that she was telling the truth. "What do you need my help with?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "The countdown," she said. "It's not just a number. It's a warning. Something terrible is about to happen, and you're the only one who can stop it." I felt a surge of fear as she spoke. It was like all the pieces were falling into place, and I finally understood the gravity of the situation. "But how do I stop it?" I asked. "You need to find the source of the countdown," she said. "It's a powerful magic, and it's only getting stronger. If you don't stop it, it will consume everything." I nodded, feeling like I had no choice but to do what she said. I didn't know how I was going to find the source of the countdown, but I knew I had to try. The woman gave me a small, silver amulet. "This will protect you," she said. "But be careful. The darkness is always watching, and it will stop at nothing to keep you from finding the source." I nodded, slipping the amulet around my neck. I felt its energy pulsing against my skin, and I knew that it would help me on my journey. And then, I stepped back through the portal, ready to face whatever lay ahead. I saw a severed arm in the dumpster. It gave me a thumbs up when I walked by. I rubbed my eyes to make sure I wasn't seeing things, but the arm was still there, sticking out of the pile of garbage. I took a step closer, and the arm moved, giving me another thumbs up. I jumped back, my heart racing. What was going on? Was this some kind of prank? I looked around, but there was no one else in sight. Just me and the dumpster. I took a deep breath and approached the arm cautiously. As I got closer, I could see that it was covered in blood and dirt, and it looked like it had been ripped off someone's body. I shuddered at the thought. I reached out tentatively and touched the arm. It was cold and clammy, and I recoiled in disgust. But then the arm moved again, and this time it pointed at something behind me. I turned around, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at the arm, it was gone. I stumbled backwards, tripping over a pile of trash and falling to the ground. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell was going on? And what was I supposed to do now? I looked around frantically, searching for any sign of the arm. But there was nothing. Just me and the dumpster, and the pile of trash that seemed to be growing higher by the second. I decided to get out of there. Whatever was happening, it was too weird and creepy for me to stick around. I started to walk away, my eyes scanning the area for any other strange occurrences. As I walked, I felt a cold breeze brush past me, even though there was no wind. I turned around, and there it was again, the severed arm, sticking out of the garbage heap, its fingers twitching as if it were beckoning me. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should approach it. But then I remembered the cold, clammy feeling of the arm when I had touched it earlier, and I shuddered. Instead, I turned and ran as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was several blocks away, my heart pounding in my chest and my breath coming in ragged gasps. I collapsed on a nearby park bench, trying to catch my breath and calm down. But even as I sat there, the image of the severed arm kept flashing through my mind, along with the memory of its thumbs up and its strange, beckoning movements. I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was just a prank or a prop left over from a movie shoot. But something about the arm felt too real, too visceral, to be fake. I decided to go home and try to forget about it. But as I walked down the empty streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, something that was just as cold and clammy as that severed arm. I looked over my shoulder, but there was nothing there. I quickened my pace, but the feeling persisted, like a chill creeping up my spine. When I finally got home, I locked the door behind me and collapsed onto my couch, exhausted and unnerved. I tried to distract myself with TV and the internet, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the severed arm and felt its cold fingers on my skin. What was happening to me? And what did that arm want? I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the severed arm reaching out to me, its fingers twitching in a grotesque mockery of life. When I woke up the next morning, I was still exhausted and jittery. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over me, but it was like a cloud that wouldn't go away. I decided to go to work, thinking that the distraction might help. But as I walked down the street, I felt like something was following me again. I turned around, but there was no one there. When I got to my office, I tried to focus on my work, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I kept seeing the severed arm in my mind, and every time I glanced out the window, I felt like something was watching me. As the day wore on, the feeling of unease grew stronger. I started to feel like I was being suffocated, like there was no escape from the sense of dread that had settled over me. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up from my desk and walked out of the office, not even bothering to tell my coworkers where I was going. I walked for what felt like hours, my mind racing and my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, something cold and clammy and insidious. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, I realized that I had no idea where I was. I looked around, trying to orient myself, but everything looked unfamiliar. That's when I saw it, the severed arm, lying in a pile of garbage next to me. Its fingers twitched, and it gave me a thumbs up. I screamed and ran, not caring where I was going. I just needed to get away from that arm, that cold, clammy, insistent arm. I ran until I was out of breath, until my legs were screaming in protest. And then I collapsed on the ground, tears streaming down my face. What was happening to me? And how could I make it stop? Over the next few days, the arm haunted me. I saw it everywhere I went, in piles of garbage, on street corners, in the shadows of alleys. It was always there, beckoning to me with its twitching fingers and thumbs up. And every time I saw it, the feeling of dread that had settled over me grew stronger. I started to lose track of time. I stopped going to work, stopped eating, stopped sleeping. I just wandered the streets, searching for some way to escape the arm's clutches. And then one day, I saw something that changed everything. I was walking down a deserted alley, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of the arm, when I saw a figure in the distance. At first, I thought it was just another garbage heap, but as I got closer, I realized it was something else entirely, a person, lying on the ground, surrounded by garbage. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should approach. But something about the figure called to me, just like the arm had. As I got closer, I saw that it was a woman, her skin pale and clammy. She was dressed in rags, her hair matted and tangled. And then I saw her arm. It was missing, just like the one that had been haunting me. But instead of being horrified, I felt a strange sense of connection, like we were two sides of the same coin. I knelt down beside her and touched her forehead, trying to see if she was still alive. But when I did, something strange happened. I saw flashes of memories of a life that wasn't mine. I saw the woman living on the streets, scavenging for food, struggling to survive. And then I saw her encounter the arm, just like I had. But instead of running away, the woman had embraced the arm. She had welcomed its cold, clammy touch, and it had become a part of her. And then I realized the arm wasn't haunting me. It was trying to join with me, to become a part of me. I looked down at the woman and saw that she was smiling, a look of peace on her face. And then I felt something cold and clammy wrap around my own arm. I knew what was happening, but I didn't resist. I let the arm join with me, let it become a part of my own body. And then everything changed. The feeling of dread lifted, and I felt a sense of peace and wholeness that I had never felt before. The woman opened her eyes and smiled at me, and then she disappeared, leaving me alone in the alley. I stood up, feeling a sense of purpose and clarity that I had never felt before. The arm was no longer haunting me, it was a part of me, just like it had been a part of the woman. And then I realized I was no longer alone. I was part of a community of people who had embraced the cold and the clammy and the strange. I walked out of the alley and into the sunlight, my arm twitching in a grotesque mockery of life. But instead of feeling horrified, I felt a sense of belonging, of being part of something greater than myself. The arm had given me a thumbs up when I walked by, and now I knew what it meant. It meant that I was no longer alone, that I was part of a community of people who had embraced the strange and the terrifying. And I knew that I would never be the same again. No matter how hard I struggled, I couldn't get free of the chains I was bound in. I only hoped they'd hold once the full moon came out. The last thing I remembered was walking in the woods and hearing strange noises. Next thing I knew, I was chained up in a small room with no windows and only one door. The room was damp and musty, and it smelled like death. I tried to remember how I got here, but my mind was foggy. I knew I had to get out of here before whoever put me here came back. I pulled at the chains with all my strength, but they wouldn't budge. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped. Then, I heard footsteps outside the door. My heart raced as the door creaked open. A tall figure stepped into the room, and I could see a glint in their eyes. I couldn't make out their features, but I knew they weren't here to help me. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't respond. Instead, they walked over to a small table in the corner of the room and picked up a knife. I tried to back away, but the chains stopped me. "Please, let me go," I begged. The figure just chuckled and started to walk towards me with the knife in hand. My heart raced as the figure approached me with the knife. I closed my eyes, waiting for the worst to happen, but nothing did. I opened my eyes to see the figure standing in front of me, staring down at me with a twisted grin on their face. "I'm not going to kill you," they said in a low voice. "Not yet, anyway." I breathed a sigh of relief, but I knew I wasn't out of danger yet. I had to find a way out of here before it was too late. "Why am I here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The figure just chuckled again and turned to leave the room. Before they closed the door behind them, they said, "You'll find out soon enough." I was left alone in the room, still chained up and terrified. I had to find a way out of here before it was too late. I looked around the room, trying to find anything that could help me escape, but there was nothing. The room was completely empty except for the table the figure had picked up the knife from. Then, I heard a howl in the distance. It was a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. I knew what it meant. The full moon was rising, and I was still chained up in this room. I struggled against the chains again, but it was no use. I was trapped. The howling continued, getting louder and closer with each passing moment. I could hear footsteps outside the door, and I knew the figure had returned. The door opened, and the figure stepped back into the room. This time, they were holding a large bowl filled with a dark liquid. "What is that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "It's a potion," the figure said. "It'll help you through the transformation." "The transformation?" I repeated, not understanding what they meant. The figure just smirked and poured the liquid into my mouth. It was bitter and foul-tasting, and I gagged as I swallowed it down. Suddenly, my body convulsed, and I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I looked down to see hair sprouting from my skin and my hands morphing into paws. I was changing, transforming into something I couldn't even imagine. The figure just watched, amused, as I howled in pain and confusion. The transformation was complete, and I was no longer human. I was a creature of the night, a werewolf. The figure opened the door and gestured for me to follow. I had no choice but to obey. As we left the room, I realized that my fate was sealed. I was now a prisoner of the full moon's curse, forever bound to this dark existence. The figure led me down a dark hallway, and my new senses were heightened. I could smell the musty air and feel the rough texture of the walls as we passed. The full moon was now shining through the small windows at the end of the hallway, and I knew that I was running out of time. As we turned the corner, I saw a group of people waiting for us. They were all dressed in black robes, and their faces were obscured by hoods. I couldn't see their features, but I knew that they were responsible for my capture. The figure handed me off to the robed figures, and they led me outside. The full moon was now high in the sky, and I could feel its power coursing through my veins. I wanted to run, to escape this nightmare, but I was bound by the chains around my neck. The robed figures led me to a clearing in the woods, and I could see a large bonfire in the center. Around the bonfire were more robed figures, and they were chanting in an ancient language that I didn't understand. I was forced to stand in front of the bonfire, and the robed figures began to circle around me. They chanted louder and louder, and I could feel the energy building up around me. I knew that something terrible was about to happen. Suddenly, the chains around my neck snapped, and I was free. I took off running, my paws pounding against the ground as I raced through the woods. But the robed figures were hot on my tail, and I knew that I couldn't outrun them for long. I ran as fast as I could, but I could hear the howls of the other werewolves in the distance. They were getting closer, and I knew that my time was up. I turned to face them, ready to fight for my life. The other werewolves circled around me, snarling and snapping their jaws. I could feel their hot breath on my fur, and I knew that I was outnumbered. Then, the figure who had captured me stepped forward. "Welcome to your new life," they said, their voice low and menacing. I could feel the transformation beginning again, and I knew that there was no going back. I was now a prisoner of the full moon's curse, and there was nothing I could do to escape it. The other werewolves howled in unison, welcoming me to their pack. I had no choice but to join them, to embrace my new existence as a creature of the night. As the moon continued to rise, I howled along with the others, my voice blending in with theirs. I was now one of them, forever bound to the curse of the full moon. The weeks and months that followed were a blur. I struggled to come to terms with my new existence as a werewolf. Every full moon, I transformed into a creature of the night and ran with the pack. I hunted and killed with them, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. During the rest of the month, I tried to live a normal life. I went to work, spent time with my family and friends, and tried to forget about the monster that lurked inside of me. But it was always there, waiting for the next full moon to arrive. As time passed, I began to feel more at home with the pack. They were my family now, and I had to protect them at all costs. But there was always a nagging feeling in the back of my mind, a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. One night, as I ran with the pack, I heard a strange noise in the distance. It sounded like someone crying out in pain. I broke away from the group and ran towards the sound, my senses on high alert. As I got closer, I could see a figure lying on the ground. It was a woman, and she was badly injured. I recognized her as a neighbor from my human life. She looked up at me with fear in her eyes, and I realized that I was still in my werewolf form. I backed away, afraid of what I might do to her. But then, something inside of me snapped. I couldn't stand to see her in pain, and I knew that I had to help her. I shifted back into my human form and approached her cautiously. She looked up at me with surprise, and I could see the fear fading from her eyes. "Help me," she gasped, her voice weak and strained. I did what I could to stop the bleeding and called for an ambulance. As I waited with her for help to arrive, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to her. Had she been attacked by another werewolf? Or was it something else entirely? The ambulance arrived, and the paramedics took her away. I never saw her again, but I couldn't forget about what had happened that night. I knew that I had to find out what was going on, no matter what the cost. Over the next few weeks, I began to investigate the attacks. I talked to other werewolves in the pack and even went to a few of the other full moon gatherings to see if I could find any clues. Eventually, I found a lead. There was a rogue werewolf in the area, one who didn't belong to any pack. He was dangerous and unpredictable, and he had been responsible for several attacks on humans. I knew that I had to stop him before he hurt anyone else. But I also knew that I couldn't do it alone. I needed the help of the pack. I approached the leader of the pack, a strong and wise werewolf named Alpha, and told him about the rogue werewolf. At first, he was hesitant to believe me, but I presented the evidence I had gathered and eventually convinced him that it was a serious threat. We formed a plan to hunt down the rogue werewolf, but we knew it wouldn't be easy. He was cunning and elusive, and we had no idea where he was hiding. On the night of the next full moon, we set out into the woods, armed with our knowledge and our strength. We split up into groups, each searching for any signs of the rogue werewolf. As I ran through the forest, my senses on high alert, I caught a whiff of something in the air. It was a familiar scent, one that I had picked up before. It was the scent of the rogue werewolf. I followed the scent deeper into the woods, moving as quietly as I could. I could hear the sounds of the other werewolves in the distance, but I knew that I had to focus on my own task. Finally, I saw him. The rogue werewolf was standing in a clearing, his back to me. He was bigger than any werewolf I had ever seen, with matted fur and gleaming eyes. I crept closer, ready to strike. But then, he turned around and saw me. For a moment, we just stared at each other, both of us frozen in fear and uncertainty. And then, he lunged at me. We fought fiercely, tooth and claw against tooth and claw. It was a brutal battle, and I knew that I was fighting for my life. Finally, I managed to land a decisive blow. The rogue werewolf fell to the ground, lifeless. I looked down at him, panting and covered in blood. It was over. The rogue werewolf was dead, and the threat was gone. But as I stood there, surrounded by the other werewolves, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There was still a sense of unease, a sense that something was still lurking in the darkness. And then, I heard it. A low growling noise, coming from somewhere in the woods. I turned to face it, my heart pounding in my chest. And then, I saw her. It was the woman I had saved from the rogue werewolf, the one I had helped to escape. But she was different now. Her eyes were dark and feral, and her teeth were sharp and gleaming. She growled at me, and I knew that there was no going back. She had been bitten by the rogue werewolf, and now she was one of us. I looked around at the other werewolves, and I knew that they felt it too. The unease, the sense of danger. We were all in this together now, bound by the same curse and the same fate. As we howled at the moon, I realized that I had found a new family. But it was a family unlike any other, a family of monsters and beasts. And as we ran through the forest, hunting and killing, I knew that I was truly one of them. A werewolf, a creature of the night. After years of research and hard work, we'd finally done it. We'd made it contagious. It wasn't our intention, of course. We were working on a vaccine for a deadly virus that was ravaging the world, and we stumbled upon something incredible. Our vaccine didn't just cure the virus, it made the person immune to all diseases. We were ecstatic. It was a medical breakthrough that would change the world. We tested the vaccine on a small group of volunteers, and it worked perfectly. They were immune to the virus, and they remained healthy for months, even years, without any signs of illness. It was amazing. We immediately began the process of getting it approved by the FDA, and we started production. But then, something strange happened. One of the volunteers came down with a cold, but it wasn't a regular cold. It was something much worse. It started with a fever and a headache, but then he began to cough up blood. We rushed him to the hospital, but it was too late. He died within hours. We were devastated. We didn't understand what had gone wrong. We had tested the vaccine extensively, and it had worked perfectly. We started to investigate, and that's when we found out the terrible truth. The vaccine was contagious. It was spreading from person to person, and it was killing them. We tried to contain it, but it was too late. It had already spread to thousands of people, and they were all dying. The hospitals were overflowing, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. We watched in horror as the death toll rose higher and higher, and we knew that we were responsible. We tried to find a cure, but it was impossible. The virus had mutated, and it was resistant to everything we tried. We were trapped in our labs, watching the world crumble around us. It was like something out of a nightmare. As I sit here, writing this, I know that I'm infected too. It's only a matter of time before I succumb to the virus. I can feel it spreading through my body, killing me from the inside out. And I know that there's nothing I can do to stop it. We thought we were creating a miracle, but we ended up creating a monster. A monster that we can't control. It's been weeks since the outbreak, and I'm one of the few left alive. I'm holed up in my lab, trying to find a way to stop this contagion from spreading further. But every day, it becomes clearer that it's a losing battle. The world outside is a wasteland of death and despair, and the infected roam the streets, searching for their next victim. I haven't left my lab in days, but I can hear them outside, scratching at the door, trying to get in. I know that if they do, it'll be the end for me. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. As I sit here, staring at my computer screen, I see a message pop up on my screen. It's from someone I don't know, someone who claims to have a cure. I'm skeptical, of course, but I'm also desperate. I respond, asking for more information. The reply comes quickly, and it's surprisingly detailed. The sender claims to be a scientist who worked on a similar vaccine, one that was designed to make people immune to all diseases. But their vaccine had a flaw, just like ours did. It was contagious, and it killed everyone who was infected. But this person had found a cure, a way to reverse the effects of the vaccine. They had tested it on themselves, and it had worked. They were immune to the virus, and they were willing to share their cure with me. I'm cautious, but I'm also out of options. I ask the sender to meet me at a specific location, and they agree. I leave my lab, armed with a gun and a hazmat suit, and make my way to the meeting place. When I arrive, I see someone in a hazmat suit standing in the middle of the deserted street. I approach cautiously, keeping my gun trained on them. They raise their hands in surrender and remove their helmet, revealing a face I recognize. It's one of my colleagues, someone who worked on the vaccine with me. They're alive, and they have the cure. How did you find this cure? I ask, my voice trembling. It wasn't easy, they reply. I had to sacrifice a lot to get it, but it's worth it. Trust me. I do trust them, and I take the cure. It's a small pill, nothing special to look at, but it's supposed to be the cure to this contagion that has destroyed the world. As I swallow the pill, I feel a sense of relief wash over me. Maybe there's hope after all. Maybe we can fix this. But then, something strange happens. My vision starts to blur, and I feel a sharp pain in my chest. I fall to the ground, writhing in agony, as my body begins to convulse. I can hear my colleague laughing, and I realize too late that they've tricked me. They never had a cure. They were infected too, and they wanted to take me down with them. I try to fight it, to hold on, but it's too late. The last thing I see before everything goes black is my colleague standing over me, their face twisted in a sickening grin. When I wake up, I'm not in my lab anymore. I'm in a strange place, a dark and musty room that smells like death. I try to move, but I'm tied to a chair, my arms and legs bound with thick ropes. Panic sets in, and I realize that I've been captured by someone. The door to the room opens, and my former colleague walks in, still wearing their hazmat suit. They approach me slowly, their footsteps echoing in the empty room. I'm sorry it had to end like this, they say, their voice muffled by the mask. But I couldn't let you ruin everything. What did you do? I ask, struggling against the ropes. What did you unleash on the world? It's not important anymore, they reply. The world is ending, and there's nothing you or I can do about it. They pull out a syringe, and I feel a wave of fear wash over me. I know what they're about to do, and I know that it's going to hurt. But then, something strange happens. The door to the room bursts open, and a group of armed soldiers storm in, guns blazing. They take my colleague down, and I watch as they're dragged out of the room, screaming and thrashing. The soldiers free me from the ropes, and I'm taken to a nearby military base. There, I'm debriefed on what happened, and I learn the truth. My colleague had indeed found a cure, but it was only temporary. The virus was still in their system, and it had mutated, becoming even more deadly than before. They had become obsessed with the idea of creating a supervirus, one that would wipe out humanity, and they had used our research to do it. But the military had been watching them, and they had been waiting for the right moment to strike. They had found me through the message exchange, and they had used me as bait to lure my colleague into a trap. It's been months since that day, and the world is slowly recovering. The virus is still out there, but it's no longer spreading. I'm hailed as a hero, the one who helped stop the virus from destroying the world. But I know the truth. I know that it was my own ambition that led to this disaster, and I know that I'll never be able to forgive myself for what I've done. Months have passed since the incident, but the memories still haunt me. The guilt of creating a virus that almost destroyed humanity is too much to bear. I've tried to make amends by working with the government to develop better safety protocols for infectious diseases, but it's not enough. One day, I receive a message on my computer from an unknown sender. The message reads, "We know what you did. We know that you were responsible for the virus. We're coming for you." I feel a chill run down my spine as I read the message. I don't know who sent it, but I know that I'm not safe. I try to trace the IP address, but it's been masked. I know that I need to leave town, but I don't know where to go. I can't go back to my old life, not after what I've done. But I can't stay here either, not if someone is coming after me. As I pack my bags, I hear a knock on my door. I hesitate for a moment before answering it, but when I do, I see a familiar face. It's my former colleague, the one who had tried to kill me months ago. "I know you're scared," they say. "But you don't have to be. I'm here to help you. What do you want?" I ask, eyeing them warily. "I want to make things right," they reply. "I know what I did was wrong, but I also know that we can't undo it. What we can do is make sure that it never happens again." I'm skeptical, but I know that I don't have many options. I agree to work with them, and we spend the next few weeks developing new safety protocols for infectious diseases. As we work together, I begin to realize that my former colleague is not the person I thought they were. They're kind and compassionate, and they're just as haunted by what happened as I am. Eventually, we develop a plan to create a new virus, one that will only infect animals. It's a risky move, but we both agree that it's the best way to make sure that something like this never happens again. We work tirelessly, and finally, we create a virus that only affects animals. It's not the cure for cancer that we had hoped for, but it's a start. As I look back on what happened, I realize that I've learned a valuable lesson. Science is a powerful tool, but it can also be a dangerous one. It's up to us to use it wisely, to make sure that we don't create something that we can't control. I leave town and start a new life, but the memories of what happened stay with me. I can't forget the people who lost their lives because of my mistake, and I can't forget the guilt that I feel. Years pass, and I become a recluse, living alone in a small cabin in the woods. But one day, I receive a package in the mail. Inside, there's a letter and a vial of clear liquid. The letter reads, "We know what you did. We know that you were responsible for the virus. But we also know that you've worked hard to make things right. We believe that you deserve a second chance." I look at the vial of liquid, and I know that it's a cure for the virus that I created. I'm hesitant to believe it, but I also know that I can't ignore it. I take the vial of liquid and travel to a remote village in Africa. There, I meet with a doctor who has been treating patients with the virus. I give the doctor the vial of liquid, and they administer it to a patient who is in critical condition. To my amazement, the patient makes a full recovery. And then another patient does. And another. Word spreads, and soon, I'm inundated with requests for the cure. I work tirelessly, developing a way to mass-produce the cure and distribute it to those in need. It's a long and difficult process, but in the end, we succeed. The virus is eradicated, and people can go back to their normal lives. As I sit in my cabin in the woods, I realize that I've been given a second chance. I've been given the chance to make amends for my mistake, to use my knowledge for good instead of evil. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know that I'll always be grateful for this second chance. And I'll always remember the lessons that I learned along the way. I was always up for a challenge, no matter how difficult or dangerous it may be. So when I heard about the asylum challenge, I knew I had to try it. Spend 24 hours locked in the old insane asylum and win $1 million. It sounded too good to be true, but the prize money was real. I signed up without a second thought. As soon as I arrived at the asylum, I felt a chill run down my spine. The building was massive and intimidating, with broken windows, rusted bars, and overgrown vines creeping up the walls. I wondered how many souls had been trapped inside these walls and how many had been lost forever. I entered the building, and the heavy metal door slammed shut behind me, making me jump. I was given a flashlight, a map, and a set of rules before being left alone. The rules were simple: stay in the designated areas, don't touch anything, and don't try to leave until the 24 hours were up. If I broke any of the rules, I would be disqualified and forfeit the prize money. I started exploring the asylum, trying to keep myself calm by reminding myself that it was just a game. However, the more I explored, the more uneasy I felt. The air was thick and musty, and every sound echoed down the empty halls. I felt like I was being watched, but every time I turned around, there was nothing there. As the hours passed, my anxiety grew. The shadows seemed to be getting darker, and the creaking floorboards sounded like footsteps. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the darkness, waiting to pounce. I checked my watch and realized that it had been 24 hours. I was ready to leave and claim my prize, but when I tried to open the door, it wouldn't budge. I tried everything, but it was like the door was welded shut. Panic set in as I realized that something was wrong. It had been 26 hours, so why was the door still locked? I retraced my steps, hoping that I had missed a key or a clue that would help me escape. But every door was locked, and every window was sealed shut. I was trapped, alone in the asylum with no way out. As the night fell, the asylum transformed into a terrifying place. Strange noises echoed throughout the halls, and ghostly apparitions appeared from the shadows. I tried to keep my sanity by reminding myself that it was just a game, but it was getting harder to believe. I heard footsteps coming from behind me and turned around, but there was no one there. My heart was pounding in my chest as I realized that I was not alone. I started to run, hoping to find a way out, but I was met with dead ends and locked doors. I finally found myself in the old operating room. It was a gruesome sight, with rusty surgical tools, blood-stained sheets, and decaying body parts scattered around the room. I tried to stay calm, but the sight made me sick to my stomach. That's when I saw her, standing in the corner of the room. It was a ghostly figure, with long black hair and a white hospital gown. Her eyes were hollow, and her skin was pale as death. She just stood there, staring at me with an icy gaze. I tried to back away, but my legs gave out and I fell to the ground. The ghostly figure started to move towards me, and I could feel her icy breath on my face. I screamed, but no sound came out. And then she vanished into thin air. I stayed there, trembling with fear, for what felt like hours. When I finally gathered the courage to get up, I realized that my flashlight had died. I was in complete darkness, with no way of seeing anything in front of me. That's when I heard a whisper in my ear. "Stay with us forever." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I knew I had to get out of there. I groped my way through the darkness, using my hands to feel my way around. I stumbled upon a staircase and started to climb, hoping that it would lead me to safety. As I climbed, I heard the sound of a piano playing a haunting melody. It was coming from the top of the staircase, and I knew I had to investigate. I reached the top of the staircase and found myself in the abandoned music room. The piano was playing by itself, and I could see the ghostly figure of a young girl sitting at the keys. I approached her cautiously, hoping that she would be able to help me escape. But when I got closer, I realized that she was not alone. There were dozens of ghostly figures, all around me, staring at me with empty eyes. I realized then that I was not playing a game. I was trapped in the asylum, forever. I tried to run, but the ghosts were surrounding me, their cold, dead fingers reaching out to touch me. I could feel their icy breath on my skin, and I knew that I was in grave danger. One of the ghosts stepped forward and spoke, its voice echoing through the room. "You have come to our home, and now you must stay with us forever. We have been waiting for you." I realized then that the game was not just a game. I had been lured into the asylum, and now I was at the mercy of the ghosts that haunted it. I fell to my knees, begging for mercy, but the ghosts just laughed, their voices filling the room with a bone-chilling cackle. And then, suddenly, everything went quiet. The ghosts vanished into thin air, and I was left alone in the music room. I tried to gather my thoughts, but my mind was in a fog. I couldn't remember why I had come to the asylum or how long I had been there. I stumbled out of the music room and into the hallway. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. I knew that I had to find a way out, but I didn't know where to look. Every door was locked, and every window was sealed shut. As I walked, I saw glimpses of the ghosts that had haunted me. They would appear suddenly, their faces twisted in an expression of pain and fear. I knew that they were trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand their message. Finally, I came to the end of the hallway, and I saw a door. It was different from the others, covered in symbols and strange markings. I approached the door cautiously, unsure of what lay beyond. As I pushed the door open, I was hit with a blast of freezing air. It was like stepping into a freezer, and I could feel my breath turning to ice in my lungs. But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the center of the room, was a circle of candles. And in the center of the circle was a figure. It was a woman, her eyes closed, her body suspended in midair. She was chanting something, her voice low and ominous. I realized then that I had stumbled upon a ritual, a summoning of some kind. And I knew that I had to stop it before it was too late. But as I stepped forward, the woman's eyes snapped open, and she turned to face me. Her eyes were black as coal, and her skin was twisted in a grotesque grin. "You should not have come here," she said, her voice a whisper. And then, she started to levitate towards me. I turned and ran, knowing that I had to get out of the asylum before it was too late. But as I ran, I could feel the woman's cold breath on my neck. And I knew that I was never going to escape the asylum alive. I sprinted through the winding halls, the woman's ghostly hands just barely missing me. The sound of her chanting grew louder, and I could feel her evil energy closing in on me. I turned a corner and found myself in a small room. A metal bed with restraints and a dusty lamp were the only objects in the room. I tried the door, but it was locked from the outside. I was trapped. The chanting grew louder and the air grew colder as the woman's presence closed in on me. I could see her shadow creeping closer and closer to the door, and I knew that I was running out of time. Suddenly, I remembered the flashlight in my pocket. I reached for it and shone it around the room, looking for anything that could help me escape. And then, I saw a loose metal bar in the bed frame. Without a second thought, I grabbed the bar and used all my strength to pry it loose. It came free with a loud snap, and I quickly used it to smash the lock on the door. As I burst through the door, I saw the woman's ghostly figure hovering just inches from me. Her black eyes bore into mine, and I could feel her cold, bony fingers brushing against my skin. I stumbled backwards, trying to get away, but she was too quick. With a sudden surge of energy, she pushed me back into the room, and the door slammed shut behind me. I was trapped once again, with the ghost of the woman hovering over me. "You cannot escape," she whispered, her voice sending chills down my spine. "You are ours now." I was too weak to fight back, too scared to even move. And so, I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. But then, something strange happened. I felt a warm, comforting presence around me, and I could hear a voice in my head. "Open your eyes," the voice said. "You have the power to defeat her." I opened my eyes and saw a bright light shining around me. It was like nothing I had ever seen before, and I could feel its warmth spreading through my body. I stood up, feeling a new sense of strength and power coursing through my veins. And then, I did something that surprised even me. I reached out and touched the ghostly figure, and she recoiled in horror. "You have no power over me," I said, my voice strong and confident. And with those words, the woman's ghostly figure vanished into thin air, leaving me alone in the room. I was free. I walked out of the room and through the winding halls of the asylum. The ghosts that had tormented me were nowhere to be found, and the air was filled with a sense of calm and peace. And then, as I rounded a corner, I saw the door to the outside world. It was open. I ran towards it, feeling a sense of hope and relief that I had never experienced before. And then, I was outside, breathing in the fresh air and feeling the warm sun on my face. I had done it. I had survived 24 hours in the old insane asylum, and I had defeated the ghosts that haunted it. But as I turned to leave, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Above the door, carved into the stone, were the words, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." My brother and I sit down with the Ouija board, and we both place our hands on the planchette. He says, "Cole, are you here with me?" And I move the planchette to yes. We had never played with a Ouija board before, but we had heard stories from our friends about the terrifying experiences they had. They told us about how the board could summon spirits and ghosts, and we couldn't resist the temptation to try it ourselves. My brother, Alex, and I were both skeptical but excited as we began our session. We had dimmed the lights and lit a few candles to create an eerie atmosphere. As we continued, we asked more questions, and the planchette kept moving, spelling out answers that made us shiver. "Who are you?" Alex asked. The planchette moved again, spelling out the name Clara. We didn't know anyone with that name, and we were both starting to feel uneasy. "Clara, how did you die?" I asked. The planchette hesitated for a moment before it began to spell out a response. It was a slow and deliberate process, as if the entity on the other side was trying to make a point. The letters slowly came together, forming a sentence that sent chills down our spines. "I didn't die. I was killed." Alex and I exchanged a worried look. We had heard enough stories to know that we should stop playing immediately. But before we could move our hands away from the board, the planchette began to move again, this time with more force. "Get out," it spelled out. "Leave now." We quickly closed the session and put the board away, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that lingered in the air. Little did we know that our brief encounter with the Ouija board would unleash something that we couldn't escape. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen in our house. At first, it was just small things, objects that had been moved, doors that had been left open, and unexplained noises that echoed through the hallways. We tried to rationalize it, convincing ourselves that it was just our imagination playing tricks on us. But the incidents continued to escalate, and soon we couldn't ignore them any longer. We started to see shadowy figures darting around the corners of our eyes, and we heard whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. We both felt like we were being watched, even when we were alone in our own rooms. One night, Alex woke me up in a panic. He had seen a figure standing at the foot of his bed, watching him as he slept. I tried to reassure him, telling him that it was just a nightmare, but deep down, I knew that something was wrong. We decided to seek the help of a paranormal investigator, hoping that they could shed some light on what was happening in our home. We found a local team who were willing to come and investigate, and they arrived at our house armed with all kinds of equipment: EMF meters, thermal cameras, and audio recorders. As they set up their equipment, we told them about our experience with the Ouija board. They nodded, as if they had heard it all before, and started to explore our home. We watched as they moved from room to room, their cameras capturing everything that they saw. After a few hours, they called us into the living room, where they had set up a monitor to review the footage they had captured. As we watched the screen, we saw something that made our blood run cold. In the corner of the room, a shadowy figure was slowly forming, as if it was materializing out of thin air. It was humanoid in shape, but its features were blurred and indistinct. The investigators looked at us gravely, confirming our worst fears: our home was haunted by something malevolent. The investigators told us that they had encountered entities like this before, and they warned us that it would only get worse if we didn't take action. They recommended that we perform a cleansing ritual, using sage and other materials to banish the spirit from our home. We were hesitant at first, but as the days went by, the activity in our house became more and more intense. We could feel a presence around us at all times, and we started to fear for our safety. We knew that we had to do something before it was too late. One night, we gathered together with the investigators and started the ritual. We lit the sage and let the smoke fill our home, reciting words that were meant to banish the spirit that had taken up residence there. At first, it seemed like it was working. The activity in our home died down, and we felt a sense of peace that we hadn't experienced in weeks. But just as we were finishing the ritual, something went horribly wrong. The candles flickered out, and the room was plunged into darkness. We heard a sound that made our blood run cold, a deep, guttural growl that seemed to come from all around us. We tried to run, but something was blocking our way. It was as if an invisible wall had formed, trapping us in the room with the malevolent spirit. We could feel it closing on us, its presence so overwhelming that we could barely breathe. As we huddled together in terror, we saw something that will haunt us for the rest of our lives. The shadowy figure that had been haunting us materialized in front of us, its features now clear and defined. It was a woman, her face twisted into an expression of rage and hatred. She floated towards us, her eyes fixed on ours, and we could feel her cold, icy breath on our faces. We knew that we were about to die. Suddenly, there was a blinding flash of light, and the spirit vanished. We were left standing there in shock, the scent of burnt sage filling our noses. We looked around, trying to find an explanation for what had just happened, but there was nothing there, just us and the burnt-out candles. We never played with the Ouija board again, and we never spoke of that night to anyone. We sold our house and moved away, hoping to leave our experience behind us. But we knew that the spirit was still out there, waiting for its next victim. And we knew that we were lucky to have escaped with our lives. After that night, I couldn't sleep without having nightmares about the woman's face. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see her eyes, her twisted smile, and hear her voice whispering my name. My brother and I became distant, barely speaking to each other, as if the experience had ripped something between us that could never be fixed. Months passed, and I thought we had put the experience behind us. I moved on with my life, got a job, and started a family. But one night, I received a phone call from my brother. His voice was shaking, and I could tell he was afraid. "Cole, it's back," he whispered into the phone. "I can feel it watching me." My heart sank as he told me about the strange noises he had been hearing in his apartment, and the feeling that he was being watched wherever he went. It was the same feeling I had felt when we had first played with the Ouija board. I knew we had to do something before it was too late. We couldn't let this thing destroy us. Together, we reached out to the paranormal investigators who had helped us before. They agreed to come to my brother's apartment and perform a cleansing ritual. We gathered together, just like we had done before, and lit the sage, reciting the words we had memorized. At first, it seemed like nothing was happening. But then, just like before, the room was filled with a deep growling noise. The candles flickered, and I could feel the presence closing in on us. But this time, we were ready. We held hands, our grip tight, as we recited the words louder and louder. The growling got louder too, but we didn't stop. We were determined to banish this thing from our lives once and for all. And then, just like before, there was a blinding flash of light, and the presence vanished. We were left standing there, panting and sweating, but alive. We knew that it wasn't over yet, that this thing would keep coming back for us. But we also knew that we were stronger than it. We had faced our fears and come out the other side. As we left the apartment, I turned to my brother and smiled. It was the first time I had smiled in a long time. "We beat it," I said, and my brother nodded, his eyes shining with relief. But deep down, I knew that we had only just begun to fight. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Life seemed to have returned to normal, and we had almost forgotten the horrors we had faced. But then strange things began to happen again. At first, it was just little things. A flicker of a light that we knew we had turned off. A whisper that we couldn't quite make out. But then the incidents grew more frequent and more severe. Objects moved on their own, and we would wake up in the middle of the night to find scratches on the walls. We knew that we had to do something, but we didn't know what. We had already tried the cleansing ritual, and it had only worked temporarily. One night, I received a call from my brother. His voice was trembling with fear. "Cole, it's back," he said. "I don't know what to do." I knew then that we had to take matters into our own hands. We had to face this thing head on. We spent days researching, trying to find a solution. And then we stumbled upon a ritual that promised to banish the evil spirit for good. It involved invoking the help of a powerful deity, and we knew it would be dangerous. But we were desperate. We had to try. We gathered together, just like we had done before, and prepared for the ritual. We lit candles, drew symbols on the floor, and chanted the words we had memorized. At first, nothing happened. But then the room grew colder, and the candles flickered violently. And then, just like before, there was a blinding flash of light. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in a dark and empty void. I could hear my brother's voice calling out to me, but it sounded distant and far away. And then I saw her. The woman from the Ouija board. She was floating towards me, her twisted smile wider than ever before. I tried to run, but I was frozen in place. She came closer and closer until she was right in front of me. "Welcome, Cole," she hissed. "I've been waiting for you." And then she was upon me, her cold fingers wrapping around my throat. I struggled to breathe as she whispered into my ear. "I'll never let you go," she said. "You're mine now." And then I woke up, gasping for air. I was back in the room with my brother, the candles still burning, and the symbols on the floor still glowing. But we had done it. We had banished the evil spirit for good. As we left the room, I turned to my brother and smiled. This time, it was a smile of relief. "We did it," I said, and my brother nodded, his eyes shining with pride. We had faced our fears and come out the other side. And this time, we knew that we had won. Us being twins, my brother and I often share experiences and sensations. It's a unique bond that only we can understand. We always feel each other's pain, happiness, and sadness. It's like we're two halves of the same person. I have always found it fascinating, but it became a living nightmare after my brother's open heart surgery. It was supposed to be a routine procedure, but things took a turn for the worse. My brother's heart stopped beating during the operation, and the doctors had to use a defibrillator to revive him. He was in a coma for a few days before he finally woke up, but something was different. He wasn't the same person anymore. He was quieter, more reserved, and seemed distant. It was like a part of him was missing. I didn't know what to do, but I knew something was wrong. We had always been close, but now he seemed like a stranger to me. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I started to notice the changes in myself. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, with my heart racing. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered in my mind. It was like something was watching me, waiting for me. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I started to hear whispers. They were faint at first, but they grew louder and more insistent. It was like someone was trying to communicate with me, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. I tried to ignore it, but it only got worse. I started having vivid nightmares, and I could feel my brother's presence in them. He was always there, watching me, but he was different. His eyes were empty, and he would just stare at me, as if he was waiting for something. I tried talking to him about it, but he didn't seem to understand. He would just nod and smile, but I knew he wasn't really listening. It was like he was in a trance, and nothing I said or did could snap him out of it. As the days went by, I started to feel like I was losing my mind. The whispers grew louder, and the nightmares became more vivid. I couldn't sleep, and I was constantly on edge. It was like something was coming for me, but I didn't know what. Then, One night, I woke up to the sound of my brother's heart monitor. It was beeping rapidly, and I could feel my own heart racing in response. I jumped out of bed and ran to his room, but when I got there, he was gone. The bed was empty, and the window was open. I looked out the window and saw my brother standing on the edge of the roof, staring out into the darkness. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. He just stood there, his arms outstretched, as if he was ready to jump. I ran out of the house and onto the street, hoping to find help. But it was late at night, and there was no one around. I was alone with my brother, who was standing dangerously close to the edge of the roof. I tried to approach him slowly, afraid that I might startle him and make him fall. But as I got closer, I saw that his eyes were closed, and his chest was heaving. It was like he was struggling to breathe. That's when I realized that his heart was beating in sync with mine. I could feel the rhythm of his heart in my own chest, and it was terrifying. It was like we were sharing a heartbeat, and I couldn't tell where my own ended and his began. I tried to reach out to him, to grab him and pull him back to safety. But as soon as I touched him, I felt a jolt of electricity run through my body. It was like my own heart had stopped, and his was the only thing keeping me alive. My brother opened his eyes and looked at me, and I saw something in them that I had never seen before. It was like a dark shadow had taken over, and he was no longer my brother. He smiled at me, and I knew then that he was lost forever. He stepped back from the edge of the roof, and I felt my own heart begin to beat again. But it was different this time. It was slower, weaker, and I knew that I was dying. I tried to scream, to call for help, but my voice was gone. As I lay there, my vision fading, I heard my brother's voice in my mind. It was like he was speaking directly to me, but I couldn't see him anymore. He told me that we were always meant to share a heart, that it was our destiny. He said that he was sorry, but it was too late to turn back now. And then, everything went dark. I woke up in a hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses. They were all talking at once, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. My head was spinning, and my body felt numb. I tried to sit up, but a nurse pushed me back down, telling me to take it easy. She said that I had been in a coma for weeks, and that my brother was dead. I couldn't believe it. It was like a part of me had been ripped away, and I didn't know how to go on. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do something to bring him back, but it was too late. The doctors told me that my heart had stopped during my brother's surgery, and that they had used a defibrillator to revive me. But something had gone wrong, and my heart had been damaged in the process. They said that I would need a transplant if I wanted to survive. I agreed to the transplant, but I knew that it wouldn't be enough. I could still feel my brother's presence in my mind, and I knew that he was still with me. It was like he was living inside of me, and I couldn't escape him. As the days went by, I started to feel like I was losing my mind again. The whispers were back, and the nightmares were worse than ever. I could feel my brother's heartbeat inside of me, and it was like he was trying to control me. I tried to fight back, to push him away, but it was no use. He was stronger than me, and he was determined to make me his vessel. One night, I woke up to find myself standing on the edge of the same roof where my brother had died. I could feel his presence urging me to jump. But I resisted, using all of my willpower to step back and resist his control. But it was a losing battle. Every day, I felt him getting stronger, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before he took over completely. I was living in a nightmare, trapped inside my own body with my dead twin brother. I went back to the hospital and begged the doctors to help me. They gave me medication, therapy, anything they could think of, but nothing worked. My brother's hold on me was too strong. One night, I had a dream that I was standing on the roof again, but this time, my brother was there with me. He told me that he didn't want to hurt me, that he just wanted to be with me forever. I begged him to let me go, to release me from his grasp, but he just smiled and said that it was too late. He said that we were meant to share a heart, and that he would never let me go. When I woke up, I knew that I had to take drastic action. I couldn't live like this anymore, trapped inside my own body with my dead twin brother. I had to do something, no matter what the cost. I went back to the roof, to the same spot where my brother had died. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, feeling his presence all around me. And then, I jumped. I expected to feel pain, to feel my body shatter against the ground. But instead, I felt weightless, like I was floating on air. I opened my eyes, and I saw that I was surrounded by darkness. At first, I thought that I had died, that I was in some sort of afterlife. But then, I saw a figure standing in the distance, and I knew that it was my brother. He walked towards me, smiling, and I knew then that I had made a terrible mistake. I had only made things worse, giving him even more power over me. But as he got closer, something strange happened. His smile faded, and he looked at me with sadness in his eyes. He said that he was sorry, that he didn't want to hurt me. He told me that he had been possessed by a dark spirit, one that had taken control of his body during the surgery. He said that he had tried to fight back, but it was too strong. I didn't know what to believe. It sounded like something out of a horror movie, not real life. But as I looked into my brother's eyes, I saw something there that I recognized. It was the same look he used to give me when we were kids, when he wanted me to believe in him. He held out his hand, and I took it, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. He told me that he had found a way to break the spirit's hold on him, but he needed my help. He said that we had to find the spirit's true name, the one that had been hidden from us all this time. He said that if we could say the name, we could banish the spirit from our lives forever. I didn't know how to do it, but I knew that I had to try. I had to save my brother and myself from this nightmare that we were trapped in. Together, we set out on a journey to find the spirit's true name, traveling through dark forests and abandoned towns. We faced many obstacles along the way, but we never gave up. And finally, after weeks of searching, we found it. The spirit's true name, hidden in an ancient book of spells. It was a name that I had never heard before, something ancient and powerful. My brother and I looked at each other, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. We returned to the hospital where the surgery had taken place. It was a desolate place, long abandoned, but we knew that the spirit was still there, lurking in the shadows. We entered the operating room where my brother had died, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The air was thick with the presence of the spirit, and I knew that we had to act fast. Together, my brother and I chanted the spirit's name, feeling the power of the words reverberate through the room. And then, there was a blinding flash of light, and the spirit appeared before us. It was a dark, shapeless creature, with glowing red eyes and a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. It snarled at us, lashing out with its sharp claws, but we stood our ground. My brother stepped forward, his hand outstretched. He spoke to the spirit, telling it that we didn't want to fight, that we just wanted to be free. And then, something amazing happened. The spirit began to shrink, to dissolve into nothingness, as if it was being consumed by its own darkness. We watched in amazement as the spirit vanished, leaving us standing alone in the empty operating room. My brother turned to me, smiling, and I knew that we had finally found peace. We left the hospital, our lives forever changed by the experience. We never spoke of it again, but I knew that my brother and I shared a bond that could never be broken. Years later, I still think about that experience, about the darkness that had taken hold of my brother's body. But I also remember the strength and love that we shared, and how we were able to overcome even the darkest of forces. Punctuality has never been my strong suit. As I sit here and watch the last ship leave for New Earth, I wish it was. My friends and family had begged me to leave with them, but I was convinced that I could make it on my own. The world had been ravaged by a series of natural disasters, and the government had been warning us for years that this day would come. The only hope for humanity was to start anew on a planet that could sustain life. The government had been working on a plan for years, and finally, the day had come. But I had missed my chance. I stood there on the empty pier, feeling a sense of dread and isolation wash over me. I knew that I would be alone on a planet that was dying. I looked around at the abandoned buildings and the empty streets, knowing that I would be the only person left to witness the end of the world. I decided to make the best of it and set out to find a place to call my own. The first few days were rough, but I managed to scavenge enough food and supplies to keep me going. I found an old apartment building that was still standing and decided to make it my home. At night, I would sit on the rooftop and look up at the sky, wondering what my fate would be. Would I be able to survive on my own, or would I succumb to the same fate as the rest of the world? One night, as I was sitting on the rooftop, I heard a strange noise coming from the building next to mine. It sounded like someone was banging on a door. I tried to ignore it, thinking that it was just my imagination, but the noise grew louder and more persistent. I decided to investigate and climbed down from the rooftop. As I walked over to the building, I noticed that the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The building was pitch black, and I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I fumbled around for a flashlight and finally found one in my backpack. I turned it on and shone it around the room. There was nobody there. I felt a sense of relief wash over me and turned to leave. But as I was walking towards the door, I heard a faint whisper coming from the darkness. "Help me." I froze in place, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. The whisper came again, more urgent this time. "Please, help me." I followed the sound of the voice, my heart racing with fear and anticipation. It led me down a dark hallway and up a flight of stairs. I could hear the banging now, louder and more frantic. As I reached the top of the stairs, I saw a flicker of light coming from under one of the doors. I pushed it open, and a wave of heat and smoke hit me in the face. Inside, I saw a woman lying on the ground, surrounded by flames. I ran to her side, but as soon as I touched her, she disappeared into thin air. The flames flickered and died, leaving me standing alone in an empty room. I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling with confusion and fear. What had just happened? Was it all just a hallucination brought on by the stress of my situation? As I turned to leave, I heard a low growl coming from behind me. I spun around, but there was nobody there. The growling continued, getting louder and more menacing. Suddenly, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared in the darkness. They grew larger and brighter until they were all I could see. I screamed and ran for the door, but it slammed shut in front of me, trapping me inside. The growling grew louder and more intense until it was all I could hear. I crouched down, covering my ears, trying to block out the noise. And then, suddenly, it was quiet. The growling had stopped, and I was alone in the darkness once again. I stayed there, huddled in a corner, until morning. When the sun finally rose, I stumbled out of the building and back to my apartment. But the memory of what had happened stayed with me, haunting me like a nightmare that I couldn't shake. As the days went on, I began to notice other strange occurrences around the city. Doors would slam shut on their own, and I would hear voices whispering in the darkness. Sometimes, I would see things moving in the shadows, but when I looked closer, there was nothing there. I knew that I was not alone on this planet, but I couldn't tell if the things I was seeing were real or just figments of my imagination. I began to feel like I was losing my mind, like the isolation was getting to me. But then, one day, I saw something that I knew was real. And it was worse than anything I could have imagined. It was a figure, tall and dark, standing at the end of the hallway. Its eyes were glowing red, just like the thing I had seen in the burning building. But this time, there was no mistaking that it was real. I froze in place, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure began to move towards me, its long limbs stretching out impossibly far. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the hard metal floor. As I ran, I could hear the figure chasing me, its breath hot on my neck. I knew that I had to find a way to escape, or I would be trapped here forever. I sprinted towards the airlock, hoping to make it outside before the figure caught me. But as I reached the door, it slammed shut, trapping me inside. I pounded on the door, screaming for someone to let me out. But there was no response, just the sound of the figure getting closer and closer. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my side. I looked down and saw that the figure had reached me, its long claws digging into my flesh. I screamed in agony, struggling to break free. But it was too late, the figure was too strong. And then, everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. My side was bandaged, and I could feel the dull ache of the wound. But the thing that scared me the most was the look on the doctor's face. He was staring at me with a mixture of horror and disbelief. I knew that something was wrong, that the thing I had seen was real. As I tried to explain what had happened, the doctor just shook his head. He told me that there was no evidence of any creature on the planet, that I must have just imagined it. But I knew the truth, and it haunted me every day. The thing that I had seen was real, and it was out there, somewhere, waiting for its next victim. I spent the rest of my days on that planet in a constant state of fear, never leaving my apartment after dark. And even when I finally managed to leave, I knew that I would never be able to escape the memory of what had happened. I think I might be the most successful serial killer in history. I've been at it for over a decade now, and I've never been caught. No one even suspects me. I blend in so well, nobody would ever think to accuse me. But that's not the most satisfying part. The best part is telling their loved ones we did everything we could. I know, it sounds sick. But it's true. There's something about the look on their faces when I tell them we did all we could to find their missing loved one. The hopelessness, the despair, it's like a drug. It fuels me to keep going, to keep doing what I do best. My latest victim was a young woman. She was beautiful, with long blonde hair and bright blue eyes. She looked like an angel, which made it all the more satisfying when I took her life. I followed her for weeks, watching her every move, learning her routine. It was easy, she was so predictable. She always went for a run at the same time every morning, and I was waiting for her. I don't remember much about the actual killing. It's like I go into autopilot mode. But I do remember the feeling of her life slipping away, the way her body went limp in my arms. It's a rush, unlike anything else. But the best part came later. The phone call to her parents. I pretended to be a police officer, telling them we had found their daughter's body. I could hear the anguish in their voices, the heartbreak. And then I said it. We did everything we could. The next day, I attended the funeral as a mourner. I watched as her parents wept over her casket, as her friends shared memories of her life. It was all so fake, so contrived. But I played my part, pretending to be just as devastated as everyone else. As I left the cemetery, I felt a sense of satisfaction wash over me. Another successful kill, another family torn apart. I knew I had to be careful, though. I couldn't let anyone suspect me. That's why I decided to take a break, to lay low for a while. I spent the next few months keeping a low profile, staying out of the public eye. But I couldn't resist the urge for long. I had to kill again. It was like an addiction, and I was the most successful addict in history. My next victim was a young man, just out of college. He was cocky, arrogant, and it was all too easy to lure him into my trap. I posed as a woman on a dating app, pretending to be interested in him. He fell for it, and we arranged to meet at a bar. I slipped a sedative into his drink, and when he passed out, I took him to my lair. It was a small, dingy apartment I rented under a fake name. No one knew about it, not even my closest friends. It was my little secret, my private playground. I don't remember much about what happened next. It's like a foggy dream, all blurry and distorted. But I do remember the feeling of power, the rush of adrenaline as I took his life. And once again, the best part was yet to come. The phone call to his parents, telling them we did everything we could. It was like déjà vu, the same sense of satisfaction washing over me as I listened to their sobs on the other end of the line. I felt invincible, like nothing could stop me. But something did. Something unexpected. It started with a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I peered through the peephole to see who it was. It was a police officer, dressed in his uniform and holding a clipboard. My heart raced as I opened the door, trying to keep my composure. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Officer Johnson from the local police department. Can I come in and ask you a few questions?" My mind raced as I tried to think of an excuse, a reason why he couldn't come in. But before I could say anything, he stepped inside and began to look around. "Nice place you've got here," he said, eyeing the small apartment. "Mind if I take a look around?" I tried to act calm, but my heart was pounding in my chest. He walked through the living room, into the kitchen, and then into the bedroom. I felt like he could sense my fear, like he knew I was hiding something. "Is everything okay, ma'am?" he asked, turning to face me. "You seem a little on edge." I tried to act casual, but my voice shook as I spoke. "No, everything's fine. Why do you ask?" He looked at me for a long moment, studying my face. "We've had some reports of a missing person in this area. A young man, about 25 years old. I was just wondering if you've seen or heard anything suspicious lately." My mind raced as I tried to think of an answer. "No, I haven't heard or seen anything out of the ordinary." He nodded, looking around the room again. "Well, if you do hear anything, or if you remember anything that might help us with our investigation, don't hesitate to give me a call." With that, he left the apartment, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I knew I had to be more careful from now on, that I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. But I also knew I couldn't stop. The urge was too strong, the addiction too powerful. And so I continued, killing again and again, always careful to cover my tracks, always careful to avoid suspicion. But something had changed. Something inside me was different. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was onto me. And then, one day, I got the phone call I had been dreading. It was the police, telling me they had a warrant to search my apartment. I panicked. I had always been so careful, always covering my tracks, but what if I had missed something? What if they found evidence that would link me to the murders? I frantically searched my apartment, trying to find anything that might incriminate me. I tore apart my closet, my dresser, my kitchen cabinets, but I couldn't find anything. And then, just as I was about to give up hope, I found it. A small piece of fabric, stained with blood, hidden under the floorboards in my bedroom. I knew what I had to do. I grabbed the fabric and made my way to the roof of my apartment building. I climbed up the ladder to the top, heart racing, and threw the fabric into the nearby dumpster. As I climbed back down the ladder, I heard a voice behind me. "Stop right there." It was the police, their guns drawn, their faces set in grim determination. "Put your hands up and step away from the ladder." I knew I was caught. There was no way out of this. I put my hands up and slowly stepped away from the ladder, feeling the cold metal of the handcuffs click around my wrists. As they led me away, I couldn't help but think about all the lives I had taken, all the families I had destroyed. I knew I would never see the outside world again, and I knew I deserved it. But even as I was being led away, even as the reality of what I had done sunk in, there was a small part of me that felt satisfied, that felt like I had accomplished something great. Because in a way, I had. I had achieved something that no other serial killer had ever achieved before. I had become the most successful, the most prolific, the most deadly. And in the end, that was all that mattered to me. I had always been fascinated by the supernatural, and my interest in it had led me to acquire various items that I believed to possess mystical powers. One of these items was a crystal ball that I had recently purchased from an antique shop. One night, after dinner, I sat down with the crystal ball and asked it a question that had been on my mind for a while: how can I escape death? To my surprise, the crystal ball replied, "No thanks, honey, I'm full." I was confused by its response and didn't know what to make of it. But then, as if on cue, my wife brought out a cake for dessert. As I ate my slice of cake, something clicked in my head. I realized that the crystal ball was warning me about something, and that something was related to the cake. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that was starting to creep up on me, but it was no use. I knew I had to find out what the crystal ball meant by its cryptic message, and I had to do it soon. The next day, I decided to do some research on the cake my wife had served the night before. I found out that it was a special recipe that she had learned from her grandmother, and it contained a unique blend of ingredients that were said to have powerful magical properties. As I delved deeper into the history of the cake, I discovered that it had a dark past. Legend had it that the recipe had been passed down from a long line of witches, and that it had been used in various rituals and spells over the centuries. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Was it possible that my wife's family had been practicing witchcraft all this time, and that I had been completely oblivious to it? The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. My wife had always been interested in the supernatural, just like me, and she had often talked about her grandmother's mysterious powers. But if my suspicions were correct, then what did the crystal ball mean by its warning? Was it telling me to stay away from the cake, or was it trying to tell me something else? I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that had taken hold of me, and I knew that I had to confront my wife about her family's history. That night, I waited until my wife was asleep before sneaking into her grandmother's old room where she kept all of her belongings. As I searched through the room, I came across an old journal that belonged to my wife's grandmother. The journal was filled with strange incantations, spells, and rituals, and it was clear that she had been heavily involved in witchcraft. But as I continued reading, I came across something that made my blood run cold. There was a passage in the journal that talked about a special cake that had the power to grant eternal life, but at a terrible cost. According to the journal, the cake had to be made with the blood of a sacrificial victim, and whoever ate it would become immortal, but their soul would be bound to the afterlife forever. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Was it possible that my wife's family had been using this cake to gain immortality all this time? As I was lost in thought, I heard a creaking sound coming from the hallway. I quickly hid the journal and went to investigate. As I peeked out into the hallway, I saw my wife standing there, staring at me with a blank expression on her face. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked in a cold voice. I didn't know how to respond. My heart was pounding in my chest as I looked at my wife, not sure what to say. I couldn't believe that I had been living with someone who was involved in something so dark and sinister. I found your grandmother's journal," I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. My wife's expression remained unchanged as she stepped closer to me. "And what did you learn from it?" she asked, her voice still cold. I took a deep breath before responding. "I learned about the cake. The one that grants eternal life, but at the cost of the soul." My wife's eyes narrowed at my words, and for a moment, I thought she was going to attack me. But instead, she let out a low chuckle. "I see that you're quite the detective, aren't you?" she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. I didn't know how to respond to her words, unsure if she was being serious or not. "You must be wondering why I never told you about my family's hobbies," she continued, her tone now serious. "The truth is, I was afraid that you wouldn't understand. But it seems that you stumbled upon our little secret." I felt a shiver run down my spine as she spoke, and I realized that I was in grave danger. I needed to get out of there before it was too late. "I need to go," I said, taking a step back. "I can't stay here any longer." My wife didn't try to stop me as I made my way to the door, but before I could leave, she called out to me. "Be careful," she said, her voice filled with an ominous warning. "You don't want to end up like the others." I didn't know what she meant by that, but I didn't stick around to find out. I quickly left the room and made my way out of the house, my mind racing with thoughts of what I had just discovered. As I walked down the street, trying to clear my head, I heard a voice calling out to me from behind. I turned around to see a figure shrouded in darkness, their face obscured by a hood. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond, instead reaching out a hand towards me. In that hand was a small piece of paper, which they handed to me before disappearing into the night. I unfolded the piece of paper to reveal a message scrawled in what looked like blood. "Beware the cake," the message read. "It's not too late to escape." My heart raced as I realized that someone was trying to help me. But who could it be? And how did they know what was going on? I knew that I couldn't stay in the town any longer. I needed to leave, to get as far away from my wife and her family as possible. And so I packed my bags and left the town, never looking back. But even now, as I write this, I can't shake off the feeling that I'm being watched, that someone or something is following me. I don't know what's going to happen to me, but I know one thing for sure. I'll never look at cake the same way again. Yesterday, I figured out how my curse worked. Apparently, only people in danger can see what I write. It all started a few weeks ago when I found this old journal in my attic. The pages were yellowed and brittle, and the leather cover was cracked and faded. It looked like it had been sitting up there for years. I decided to take the journal down to my room and give it a read. As I opened the first page, I saw that it was blank. However, as I picked up a pen to start writing in it, the ink seemed to disappear before my eyes. Confused, I tried a different pen, but the same thing happened. Suddenly, I heard a loud noise from outside my window. As I went to investigate, I saw that my neighbor's house was on fire. I quickly called the fire department and watched as the flames were extinguished. As I went back to my room, I noticed that the pages of the journal were no longer blank. They were filled with details about the fire, including the exact time it started and the cause of the fire. It was like the journal had predicted the fire before it even happened. I was freaked out by the experience, but I didn't think much of it until the next day when I found out that my friend's car had crashed on the highway. I had a feeling that the journal was somehow involved, so I picked it up and sure enough, the pages were filled with details about the accident. It was then that I realized the curse of the journal. It could predict disasters before they happened, and only those in danger would be able to see what I wrote. I was terrified at the thought of what else the journal might predict. As the days went by, the journal continued to predict disasters before they happened. It was as if the book was cursed and I was the only one who could see its predictions. At first, I tried to ignore the journal, but it was like it had a hold on me. I couldn't resist picking it up and writing in it every time I heard of a potential disaster. However, things took a turn for the worse when I received a call from my mother. She was crying and told me that my little sister had been kidnapped. My heart dropped to my stomach as I realized that the journal had predicted this too. I immediately grabbed the journal and started writing down everything I knew about the kidnapping. The location, the time, the kidnapper's description, everything. I didn't know if it would help, but I had to try. As I rushed to the location where my sister was supposed to be held captive, I noticed that the journal pages were turning blank. I panicked, thinking that maybe the journal had been wrong this time. But as I got closer to the location, the pages started to fill up again. This time, with details about my sister's whereabouts and the kidnapper's movements. I followed the journal's instructions and was able to rescue my sister from the kidnapper's clutches. As we made our way back home, I knew that the journal was more than just a cursed object. It was a tool that I could use to help others in danger. But the more I used the journal, the more I realized that it was starting to consume me. I was constantly on edge, waiting for the next disaster to strike. The journal had become an addiction and I was powerless to stop it. As the days went by, I found myself becoming more and more obsessed with the journal. I would spend hours writing in it, trying to predict the next disaster. I couldn't stop myself. It was like I was under a spell. One night, as I was writing in the journal, I heard a strange noise coming from the attic. It was a scratching sound, like something was trying to claw its way through the ceiling. Curious, I made my way up to the attic and found the source of the noise. It was a small, leather-bound book that looked almost identical to the cursed journal. I picked it up and felt a strange energy coursing through my body. Suddenly, I was transported to a different place. It was a dark and ominous room with a single candle flickering in the corner. In the center of the room, there was a figure standing, wearing a hooded cloak. The figure spoke to me, its voice echoing through the room. You have been chosen to carry on the curse of the haunted journal. You are the keeper of the secrets and the guardian of those in danger. Use your power wisely, for if you do not, the curse will consume you. I was terrified, but at the same time, I felt a sense of purpose. I knew that I had been chosen to help others, to use the power of the journal to save lives. From that day forward, I used the journal to predict disasters and help those in need. But the more I used it, the more I realized that the curse was not just a simple prediction tool. It was something far more sinister. One day, as I was writing in the journal, I noticed that the ink had started to glow. It was a deep, ominous red that seemed to pulsate with a life of its own. I knew then that something was terribly wrong. As I continued to write, I could feel the energy building inside me. It was like a dark force was taking over, pushing me to the brink of insanity. I tried to stop writing, but I couldn't. The curse had taken control, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The journal had become my life, and I was completely consumed by it. I spent all my time writing in it, trying to predict the next disaster. But the more I used it, the more I realized that the journal was controlling me. I would hear whispers in my head, urging me to write more, to predict more disasters. I tried to resist, but it was like the journal had a hold on me. One night, as I was writing in the journal, I noticed that the pages were filling up faster than usual. It was like the curse was trying to tell me something important. I read through the pages, and my heart sank as I realized what the curse was trying to tell me. It was predicting my own death. According to the journal, I would die in a horrific car accident on the highway. The date and time were written clearly, and there was no way to change it. I knew then that the curse had finally caught up with me. I tried to ignore the prediction, but I couldn't. Every time I got in my car, I felt a sense of dread, like the curse was following me, waiting for the right moment to strike. Days turned into weeks, and the day of my predicted death grew closer and closer. I tried to stay off the highway, but it was like the curse was drawing me towards it, pulling me inexorably towards my fate. On the day of the predicted accident, I felt a sense of resignation. I knew that there was no escaping my fate, that the curse had finally caught up with me. As I drove down the highway, I could feel the curse closing in on me. I closed my eyes and waited for the impact, for the inevitable end. But then, something strange happened. The car swerved out of control, and I felt a sudden impact. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses. Apparently, I had survived the accident, but just barely. The doctors told me that I was lucky to be alive, that it was a miracle that I had survived the crash. But as I lay in that hospital bed, I knew the truth. It wasn't luck or a miracle that had saved me. It was the journal, the curse that had consumed me for so long. From that day forward, I vowed never to use the journal again. I knew that it was too dangerous, too powerful for me to control. The curse had almost killed me, and I wasn't going to let it take control of my life again. As I watched the sun set from my luxurious villa in Paris, I felt a sense of contentment wash over me. I had achieved everything I ever wanted in life, and now I was basking in the glow of my success. But just as I was about to turn in for the night, my phone rang. It was my friend John, who lived in New Zealand. I could hear the fear in his voice as he told me that the sun had set in his part of the world too, even though it was only midday there. At first, I thought he was joking, but as he explained the bizarre phenomenon, I began to feel a chill run down my spine. John told me that the sky had turned dark and ominous, and there was a strange silence in the air. Even the birds had stopped chirping. As he spoke, I could hear a sense of panic in his voice, and I knew that something was seriously wrong. I tried to calm him down, telling him that it was probably just a solar eclipse or some kind of natural phenomenon. But deep down, I knew that it was something much more sinister than that. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach. I knew that I had to find out what was happening in New Zealand, no matter the cost. I quickly booked a flight to New Zealand, determined to get to the bottom of this mysterious phenomenon. As I boarded the plane, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding wash over me. What if this was some kind of supernatural event that I was completely unprepared for? As the plane took off, I stared out of the window, watching as the sun disappeared below the horizon. The flight was long and arduous, but finally, I landed in Auckland, where I was met by John. He looked worse for wear, with dark circles under his eyes and a haunted expression on his face. He hugged me tightly, telling me that he was glad I was here. We got into his car, and he drove us to his house, where I was shocked to find that everything was in a state of disarray. There were overturned chairs, broken dishes, and other signs of a struggle. John explained that when the sun had set earlier in the day, everything had gone dark, and he had heard strange noises coming from outside. When he went to investigate, he saw that the sky was completely black, with no stars or moon to be seen. That's when he heard the whispers. At first, they were barely audible, but as the darkness grew, they became louder and more insistent. He couldn't make out what they were saying, but he knew that they were malevolent in nature. Suddenly, he heard a loud banging on the door, and when he looked through the peephole, he saw a figure standing outside. It was tall and shadowy, with glowing red eyes that seemed to bore into his soul. John knew that he had to get out of there, so he grabbed his keys and ran to the car. As he finished recounting his story, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease settling over me. What could have caused this darkness, and what did it want with us? We spent the next few hours huddled in John's house, trying to figure out what was happening outside. The whispers continued, growing louder and more frantic with each passing moment. As the night wore on, we realized that we were not alone. Something was moving outside, something that seemed to be watching us from the shadows. We could hear its breathing, slow and steady, as it circled the house, looking for a way in. We tried to call for help, but the phones were dead. The internet was down too, and there was no way to contact anyone outside. We were completely cut off from the world, trapped in this darkness with no hope of escape. As the hours turned into days, we began to feel our sanity slipping away. The whispers had become a constant presence, a voice in the back of our minds that would not be silenced. We could no longer tell if we were awake or asleep, if what we were experiencing was real or just a figment of our imagination. Finally, we could take it no longer. We decided that we had to venture outside, to face whatever was waiting for us in the darkness. We armed ourselves with makeshift weapons and stepped out into the night, ready to confront our fears. The world outside was a nightmare. The darkness was all-encompassing, a thick blanket that smothered everything in its path. We could barely see our hands in front of our faces, and every sound was amplified, echoing through the night like a scream. We stumbled through the darkness, following the sound of something moving in the distance. As we drew closer, we could make out a figure, hunched over and shrouded in shadows. We approached it cautiously, weapons at the ready. But as we drew closer, we realized that this was no human being. Its skin was black and oily, and its eyes glowed with a sickly green light. Before we could react, it lunged at us, a mass of writhing tentacles and razor-sharp teeth. We fought back with everything we had, but it was too strong, too fast. As I felt its teeth sink into my flesh, I knew that we were done for. We had entered a world of darkness, and there was no going back. I woke up in a dimly lit room, my head pounding and my body aching. I was lying on a cold metal table, surrounded by strange machines and instruments that I couldn't identify. As I tried to sit up, I realized that I was not alone. There were others in the room with me, lying on similar tables, their bodies covered in bruises and lacerations. I recognized John lying on a table next to mine, his eyes closed and his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. I tried to call out to him, but my throat was too raw, my voice too weak. Suddenly, the door to the room swung open, and a figure stepped inside. It was tall and thin, with a face that was both beautiful and terrifying. Its eyes glowed with a hypnotic light, and its skin was as black as the night. It spoke to us in a language that I could not understand, its voice a low, rumbling growl. It gestured to the machines around us, and I realized with horror that they were feeding off of our energy, draining us of our life force. I struggled to get off the table, to fight back against this monstrous being, but my body refused to obey me. I was too weak, too drained. As the creature approached me, I knew that this was the end. I had entered a world of darkness, and there was no way out. But then, a miracle happened. The creature recoiled, its eyes widening in surprise. And then, it vanished, leaving us alone in the room. I looked around, trying to understand what had just happened. That's when I saw a small, glowing orb floating in the air. It was beautiful, a shimmering light that seemed to radiate hope and love. As I watched, the orb grew larger, filling the room with its light. And then, everything went white. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the ground outside, surrounded by a group of people. They told me that they had come to investigate the darkness, that they had fought against the creatures that had invaded our world. They told me that they had saved us. I looked around, trying to take in everything that had happened. The world was bright and beautiful once again, the darkness banished forever. As I stood up, I knew that I had been given a second chance. I had entered a world of darkness, but I had emerged into the light. And I would never take that light for granted again. I love these clap-on lights. They're so convenient, especially when I come home late and can't find the switch in the dark. Just one problem with them: when I clap to turn them on, something under my bed claps to turn them off. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. I mean, who would believe that there's actually something under my bed? I'm not a child anymore, and I don't believe in monsters or boogeymen. But the clapping noise was real, and it happened every time I tried to turn on the lights. I tried to ignore it and went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. The room was pitch black, and I felt like something was watching me. I tried to rationalize it, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Finally, I got up and turned on the lights manually. There was nothing there, just my bed and some old boxes I hadn't bothered to unpack. The next night, I tried the clap-on lights again. I was sure it was just a glitch, and they would work fine this time. But the clapping noise was back, louder and more insistent than before. It sounded like something was trying to communicate with me. I got up and checked under the bed, but there was nothing there. No monsters, no boogeymen, just an empty space. I shrugged it off and turned on the lights manually, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. That's when I heard a voice, a faint whisper coming from under the bed. "Turn off the lights," it said. I froze, unsure if I had heard it correctly. But then it came again, louder this time. turn off the lights. I didn't know what to do. Should I listen to the voice and turn off the lights? Or should I ignore it and turn them on manually? I decided to try one more time and clap my hands. The lights turned on, but the clapping noise from under the bed was so loud that it startled me. I jumped back and fell on the floor, hitting my head on the nightstand. As I lay there, dazed and confused, I realized that something was terribly wrong. There was something under my bed, and it wasn't human. I got up slowly, trying to shake off the dizziness, and looked under the bed again. There was still nothing there, but I knew that something was watching me. I could feel its presence, like a cold breath on the back of my neck. Suddenly, the clapping noise started again, but this time it wasn't just one clap. It was a series of claps, like someone was applauding me. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that the noise was getting closer. I backed away from the bed, feeling like I was trapped in a nightmare. The clapping grew louder and more frantic, and I could hear a strange whispering voice coming from under the bed. It was like nothing I had ever heard before, like a mix of human and animal sounds. I knew I had to get out of there, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen with fear, unable to think or act. The clapping noise was getting closer and closer, and I felt like it was going to swallow me whole. Finally, I managed to snap out of it and ran to the door. But when I turned the handle, it wouldn't budge. It was like it was locked from the outside, and I was trapped in my own room. The clapping noise was getting louder and more intense, and I could feel something breathing on the back of my neck. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was completely paralyzed with fear, unable to do anything but wait for the end to come. That's when I heard a faint whisper in my ear. "You can't escape," it said. "You belong to me now." And then everything went black. I woke up a few hours later, lying on the floor with a splitting headache. The room was silent, and there was no sign of the thing that had been under my bed. But I knew it was still there, waiting for me to let my guard down. From that day on, I never used the clap-on lights again. I always turned them on manually, even if it meant stumbling in the dark. And every night, I could feel the thing under my bed, waiting and watching, like a predator waiting to strike. I knew that one day, it would come for me, and there would be no escape. As the weeks went by, I tried to convince myself that it was all just a nightmare. But every time I went to bed, I could feel the thing under my bed, waiting for me. I could hear its whispers in my ear, and feel its cold breath on the back of my neck. I started to avoid my room as much as possible, spending most of my time in the living room or outside. But no matter where I went, I could always feel its presence, like a dark cloud hanging over me. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a strange scratching noise coming from the wall. It was like something was trying to claw its way out from inside. I tried to ignore it and went to bed, but the scratching noise only grew louder. It was like it was coming from inside my head, echoing through my brain. Suddenly, I heard a loud thump on the floor, like something heavy had landed on the carpet. I sat up in bed, my heart racing, and looked around the room. That's when I saw it. The thing that had been under my bed was now standing in the corner of the room, watching me with glowing red eyes. It was tall and gaunt, with long arms and legs that seemed to bend in impossible ways. Its skin was a sickly shade of gray, and it was covered in matted hair and fur. I tried to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. The thing started to move towards me, its limbs contorting in unnatural ways. It was like it was made of rubber, able to stretch and bend in ways that no human body should be able to. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and I knew that it had finally caught me. I closed my eyes and waited for the end to come. But then, something strange happened. The thing's grip on my shoulder loosened, and I heard a strange hissing noise coming from its mouth. It was like it was in pain. I opened my eyes and saw that the thing was writhing on the ground, its body convulsing in spasms. And then, in a burst of smoke and flames, it was gone. I sat there, panting and shaking, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had it been a hallucination? A trick of my mind? But then I saw the burn marks on the carpet, and I knew that it had been real. The thing that had been under my bed had been destroyed, and I was finally free. Or so I thought. After the encounter with the creature, things only seemed to get worse. I thought that destroying it would bring an end to my nightmare, but instead, it was just the beginning. Every night, I would hear strange noises coming from inside the walls. Scratching, scraping, and thumping, like something was trying to claw its way out. And every night, I would feel the presence of something dark and malevolent lurking in the shadows, waiting for me. I started to lose sleep and became increasingly paranoid. I would check under my bed every night, but there was never anything there. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. One night, I woke up to find my room filled with a thick, choking fog. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear the sound of heavy breathing coming from somewhere in the room. I tried to get out of bed, but something grabbed me by the ankle and pulled me back down. I kicked and thrashed, but whatever was holding me was too strong. And then, in a flash of light, the fog dissipated, and I found myself face to face with the creature once again. It was different this time, though. It was like it had been reborn, stronger and more powerful than ever before. Its eyes glowed brighter, and its limbs were longer and more flexible. It was like it had shed its old skin and emerged as a new, more terrifying creature. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth, and let out a deafening screech that shook the room. I thought that I was done for, that there was no way I could survive another encounter with the creature. But then, something strange happened. A beam of light shot through the window, illuminating the creature and causing it to recoil in pain. I could see it writhing and convulsing, like it was being burned from the inside out. And then, in a burst of smoke and flames, it was gone once again. I lay there, gasping for breath and trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had someone come to my rescue? Had the creature been destroyed for good this time? But then I heard a voice, coming from somewhere in the room. "Thank God I got here in time," the voice said. "I was afraid that thing had already killed you." It was a man's voice, deep and reassuring. I looked around the room, but I couldn't see anyone. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "My name is John," the voice replied. "I'm a demon hunter." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A demon hunter? Was this some kind of joke? But then I remembered the creature that had been tormenting me for weeks, and I realized that this was no laughing matter. "How did you find me?" I asked. "It wasn't easy," John replied. "Demons are masters of deception and can hide their presence from even the most skilled hunters. But I've been tracking this one for a long time, and I finally caught a break when it attacked you." "So, what now?" I asked. "Is it gone for good?" John hesitated for a moment before answering. "I'm not sure," he said. "This creature is different from any demon I've ever encountered. It seems to have the ability to regenerate and adapt to its environment." "So, what can we do?" I asked. "I need to do some more research," John said. "But in the meantime, I have some talismans that should keep it at bay. I'll leave them with you, and if anything else happens, don't hesitate to call me." With that, John was gone, leaving me alone once again. For a few days, things seemed to calm down. I didn't hear any strange noises or feel the presence of anything sinister. I even started to sleep a little better. But then, one night, I woke up to find the creature hovering over my bed. It was different again, more grotesque than ever before. Its skin was a sickly shade of green, and its eyes were bloodshot and crazed. It reached out a clawed hand, and I could see that its fingers had grown longer and more menacing. I grabbed the talismans that John had given me and held them up, hoping that they would do something to protect me. But the creature just laughed, a high-pitched, mocking sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You think those trinkets can save you?" it said, its voice filled with malice. "You're nothing but a pawn in this game, and I'm the one pulling the strings." I didn't know what to do. I was paralyzed with fear, and I knew that the creature was right. I was helpless in the face of its power. But then, something strange happened. A voice spoke to me, a voice that I recognized as John's. "Remember what I told you," the voice said. "You have the power to fight back. Believe in yourself, and you can overcome even the strongest demons." With those words ringing in my ears, I reached deep down inside myself and found a reserve of strength that I never knew existed. I stood up to the creature, holding the talismans in my hand and facing it head on. For a moment, the creature seemed surprised, taken aback by my sudden show of courage. But then it lunged at me, its claws slashing through the air. I dodged to the side and swung the talismans at it, hitting it square in the chest. There was a blinding flash of light, and the creature let out a deafening scream. And then it was gone, just like that. I collapsed on the bed, exhausted but relieved that it was finally over. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly through the night. When I woke up the next morning, it was to a bright and sunny day. The birds were singing outside, and the world seemed full of promise. I got out of bed and stretched, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. As I walked over to the window to open the blinds, I noticed something strange on the floor. It was a small, black object, no larger than a pea. But it was pulsing with a strange energy, and I could feel its power even from across the room. I picked it up gingerly, unsure of what it was or what it could do. But as I held it in my hand, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I knew that whatever this thing was, it was a gift from John, a symbol of his gratitude for my bravery. And as I looked out the window at the beautiful day outside, I knew that my life would never be the same. I had faced my fears and come out on the other side, stronger and more resilient than ever before. I never expected to be one of the last ones standing. It was like a nightmare that just kept going. The pandemic started like any other, but it quickly became clear that it was something different. It only spread to those who knew about it, and once you were infected, there was no cure. I was one of the lucky ones who managed to avoid it, but my luck was about to run out. It started with a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I hesitated before answering it. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the door to find a man standing there. He looked sickly, his skin pale and clammy, and his eyes sunken and bloodshot. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my distance. He didn't answer at first, just stared at me with a look of desperation. Then he spoke, his voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "You have to help me. I'm infected. I know about the pandemic." I felt a chill run down my spine. I had heard about the infected, but I had never seen one up close before. I tried to back away, but he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "You have to help me," he repeated. "You're the only one who can." I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to risk getting infected myself, but I also couldn't just leave him there to suffer. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I called the authorities. They arrived quickly, dressed in hazmat suits and armed with all sorts of equipment. They took the infected man away, and I thought that was the end of it. But it was only the beginning. As the days went on, more and more infected people started showing up at my door. Some were strangers, while others were people I knew. They all had the same desperate look in their eyes, begging for my help. I tried to turn them away at first, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I knew that they were going to die, and I didn't want them to die alone. So, I let them in, one by one. It wasn't long before my home became a refuge for the infected. I did my best to take care of them, but it was overwhelming. I didn't have the medical expertise or the resources to deal with so many sick people. I started to feel the weight of their suffering on my shoulders. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. All I could do was watch as they slowly died, one by one. That's when I realized that I was infected too. I had known too much, and now I was paying the price. The end was near, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I spent my last days lying in bed, too weak to move. The infected who were still alive tried to take care of me, but I knew that it was hopeless. I was beyond saving. As the end drew near, I started to see things. Hallucinations, I thought at first. But then they started to feel too real. I saw shadows moving in the corners of my room, heard whispers in my ear when there was no one else around. The infected who were with me said they couldn't see or hear anything, but I knew that I wasn't alone. One night, I woke up to find a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was a woman, but she was blurry and indistinct, like she wasn't entirely there. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. She didn't answer, just stood there staring at me with empty eyes. I tried to reach out to her, but my arm was too weak. And then she was gone, leaving me alone in the darkness once again. The next day, I asked the other infected if they had seen or heard anything strange. They shook their heads, looking at me with pity in their eyes. "You're not long for this world," one of them said. "It's normal to start seeing things." But I knew that it wasn't just my mind playing tricks on me. There was something else in the house, something that didn't belong. As the days passed, the presence in the house grew stronger. I could feel it watching me, waiting for me to slip away into the darkness. And then, one night, it finally revealed itself. I woke up to find myself surrounded by figures, dozens of them, all blurred and indistinct. They were reaching out to me, their fingers like cold tendrils that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone, leaving me alone once again. But I knew that they would be back. They were waiting for me, waiting for my time to run out. And I was powerless to stop them. As the days passed, the figures grew bolder. They started appearing during the day, not just at night. I would be sitting in a room with the other infected, and suddenly one of them would reach out and try to touch me. None of the others seemed to notice, or if they did, they didn't say anything. They just looked at me with their dead eyes and went back to whatever they were doing. I tried to leave the house, to get away from the figures and the infected who had already succumbed to the virus. But every time I tried, they were there, blocking my path, reaching out to grab me. It was like I was trapped in a nightmare, a never-ending cycle of terror and despair. And then, one day, I heard a voice. It was faint at first, like a whisper on the wind. But as I listened, it grew louder and clearer. "Come to me," the voice said. "I can help you." I didn't know what to do. Part of me was terrified, convinced that the voice was just another manifestation of the virus that was slowly killing me. But another part of me was desperate for salvation, for some kind of escape from the nightmare that had become my life. So I followed the voice. It led me through the house, down dark hallways and into abandoned rooms. The figures were there, too, but they didn't seem to notice me anymore. They just went about their business, as if I didn't exist. Finally, the voice led me to a room at the end of a long, dark hallway. The door was open, and inside I could see a figure sitting in a chair. It was a woman, but she was different from the others. She was solid, real. And she was smiling. "Welcome," she said, beckoning me inside. "I've been waiting for you." I hesitated, but the voice urged me forward. So I stepped inside. The room was small, with a single window that looked out onto a desolate landscape. There was a bed, a dresser, and a few other pieces of furniture, but nothing else. The woman motioned for me to sit down on the bed, and I did. She sat down in the chair opposite me, still smiling. "I know what you're going through," she said. "I've been there, too. But I found a way out." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean that there's a way to beat the virus," she said. "A way to survive." "How?" I asked, my heart racing with hope. The woman leaned forward, her smile widening. "You have to forget," she said. "You have to forget everything that's happened to you, everything that's led up to this moment. You have to let go of your past and focus on the present." "That's it?" I said, feeling a surge of disappointment. "Just forget?" "It's not easy," the woman said. "But it's the only way. If you can forget, you can survive. If you can't, then you're doomed to be one of them." She gestured to the window, and I looked out. I could see the figures, the infected, wandering aimlessly through the streets below. "I don't want to be like them," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to be," the woman said. "But you have to make a choice. Will you forget and live? Or will you remember and die?" I didn't know what to do. I was torn between the hope of survival and the fear of losing everything that had led up to this moment. But as I sat there, staring out the window, something inside me shifted. I thought about all the pain and suffering I had endured since the pandemic began, and I realized that I couldn't go on like this. I made my choice. "I'll do it," I said, turning to face the woman. "I'll forget." The woman smiled again, and I could see something in her eyes that I hadn't noticed before. Something dark and dangerous. "Good," she said. "Just close your eyes and let it happen." I did as she instructed, and at first, I felt nothing. But then, slowly, my memories began to fade. My childhood, my family, my friends, all of it disappeared into the void. I didn't feel scared or sad. In fact, I didn't feel anything at all. When I opened my eyes, the woman was gone. The room was empty, and I was alone. But I was also free. The virus was gone, too, and I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in a long time. I stood up and walked to the window. The figures were still there, but now they didn't seem so scary. They were just lost souls, wandering through a world they didn't understand. And then, something caught my eye. In the distance, I could see a small group of people, huddled together and moving towards me. I didn't know who they were or where they had come from, but I didn't care. I was just happy to see other human beings again. As they got closer, I could see that they were healthy, unaffected by the virus. They looked at me with a mix of curiosity and fear, and I realized that I must look strange to them with my blank expression and empty eyes. But I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I was alive. And as we stood there, looking out at the world together, I knew that I had made the right choice. I love diving into the deepest parts of the ocean where you can't even see the bottom. This time, I can't see the surface either. I was on a solo dive, exploring a remote part of the ocean. As I descended deeper, the water became darker and colder, but I didn't mind. The thrill of exploring the unknown was all I needed. I reached a depth of 500 meters when I noticed something strange. The water around me was getting even darker, as if a cloud had passed over the sun. But there was no sun down here, and the darkness was spreading quickly. I tried to shine my flashlight in every direction, but it was useless. The darkness was so thick, I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. Panic set in as I realized that I was lost, alone, and trapped in the depths of darkness. I tried to ascend, but my dive computer showed that I was still descending. It was as if I was sinking into a void, deeper and deeper into the abyss. My heart raced with fear as I realized that I was no longer in control. Suddenly, a voice echoed in my head, deep and ominous. "Welcome to the depths of darkness," it said. "You are mine now." I screamed and struggled against the weight that pulled me deeper into the abyss, but it was no use. The darkness enveloped me, and I felt like I was suffocating. Just as I was about to lose consciousness, I saw a faint light in the distance. It was small, but it gave me hope. I swam towards it with all my might, and as I got closer, the light grew brighter. When I finally reached the source of the light, I was shocked by what I saw. It was a shipwreck, and the light was coming from a small lantern inside. I swam inside the shipwreck, hoping to find some shelter from the darkness. The ship was old and decrepit, and I wondered how it had ended up here in such a remote part of the ocean. As I explored the ship, I heard strange noises coming from the darkness beyond. It sounded like whispers, or maybe the creaking of the old wood. Whatever it was, it made my skin crawl. I decided to keep moving, hoping to find a way out of this nightmare. But as I swam deeper into the ship, I realized that I was not alone. I could feel eyes watching me, lurking in the shadows. I tried to ignore the feeling and kept moving forward. But the whispers grew louder, and I could hear the sound of something dragging itself across the floor. I shined my flashlight in the direction of the sound and saw a figure crawling towards me. It was humanoid in shape, but its skin was pale and translucent. Its eyes were empty sockets, and its mouth hung open, revealing rows of sharp teeth. I froze in terror as the creature lunged at me, but it passed right through me as if I was made of mist. It disappeared into the darkness, leaving me trembling and disoriented. I tried to find my way out of the shipwreck, but every turn seemed to lead me deeper into the abyss. The whispers grew louder, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. Just as I was about to lose all hope, I saw a glimmer of light in the distance. It was the faint glow of my dive computer, indicating that I was finally ascending. I swam towards the light with all my strength, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. But just as I was about to break the surface, something pulled me back down into the depths. I struggled against the force that was pulling me back down, but it was too strong. It felt like an invisible hand was holding me in place, preventing me from reaching the surface. I looked around frantically, trying to see what was causing this. That's when I saw them. Dozens of pale, translucent figures were surrounding me, their empty eye sockets staring at me. I tried to scream, but my lungs were filling with water. I was drowning, and there was nothing I could do to save myself. Just as I was about to lose consciousness, the figures disappeared, and I was propelled upwards. I broke the surface, gasping for air and coughing up water. I looked around, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But everything seemed normal. The sun was shining, and the ocean was calm. I swam back to my boat, feeling shaken and disoriented. I didn't tell anyone about what had happened, fearing that they would think I was crazy. For weeks after the dive, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to return to the depths. I stopped diving altogether, too scared to face whatever was down there again. Years have passed since that day, but the memory still haunts me. I never did find out what caused the darkness or the pale figures, but I know one thing for sure. The depths of the ocean hold secrets that are best left undiscovered. I couldn't believe my eyes as I saw my daughter, Emma, get on the school bus for her first day of kindergarten. She was so excited, with her brand new backpack and a big smile on her face. My husband and I waved goodbye to her from the sidewalk, feeling proud and a little sad that our baby was growing up so fast. But our joy was short-lived. As we turned to walk back to our house, we saw another school bus pull up to the stop, just 2 minutes after Emma's bus had driven away. The driver looked at us and honked his horn, indicating that he was there to pick up our daughter. Confused, my husband and I approached the driver and asked what was going on. He looked at us as if we were crazy and said that he was Emma's bus driver and that he had been assigned to pick her up from our address. We were dumbfounded. We had received a letter from the school district with the name of the bus company and the number of Emma's bus, and it was the same one that had just left. But now there was another bus, with a different number, claiming to be Emma's. We decided to call the school district to clear things up. After being put on hold for what felt like an eternity, we finally spoke to someone who told us that there had been a mistake. Emma's bus had been double booked, and the two bus companies were supposed to work out a solution between them. But it seemed that they hadn't, and now we didn't know which bus our daughter was on. My heart sank as I thought about Emma, all alone on a bus with strangers, not knowing where she was going. I looked at my husband, and we both knew that we had to do something. We decided to follow the second bus in our car, hoping to catch up to Emma and make sure she was okay. As we drove, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. Something didn't feel right about this situation. Why had there been a mix-up with the buses? And why was there another bus, with a different number, claiming to be Emma's? We followed the second bus for what felt like an eternity, never losing sight of it. We could see the driver in the front and a few kids sitting in the back. But we couldn't see Emma. As we drove deeper into the countryside, the road started to get narrower and more deserted. We were the only car on the road, with nothing but trees and fields on either side. Suddenly, the bus turned off onto a dirt road, disappearing from our sight. We were hesitant to follow, but we knew we had to find Emma. We turned onto the dirt road, bouncing along in our car, and soon came across the bus, stopped at a small schoolhouse in the middle of nowhere. We parked our car and got out, running towards the bus. As we approached, the driver got out of the bus and looked at us suspiciously. He asked us what we were doing there, and we explained that we were looking for our daughter, who we thought might be on his bus. He told us that he had no idea what we were talking about, and that he had only picked up the kids who were assigned to his route. But we could see a few kids on the bus, looking at us with fear in their eyes. We didn't believe the driver, but we didn't know what to do. We couldn't force him to let us on the bus, and we couldn't leave without Emma. We were stuck. Suddenly, we heard a loud banging sound coming from the back of the schoolhouse. It sounded like someone was trapped inside. My husband and I ran towards the sound, not knowing what to expect. As we got closer, we saw a small shed at the back of the schoolhouse with a padlock on the door. We could hear someone inside, crying and screaming for help. It sounded like a child. Without thinking, my husband grabbed a rock and smashed the padlock open. We swung the door open, and there she was. Emma was huddled in the corner of the shed, tears streaming down her face. She was shaking with fear, and her clothes were torn and dirty. We hugged her tightly, relieved that she was okay. But we knew that something was terribly wrong. Who had put her there? And why? As we looked around, we saw something that made our blood run cold. There was a small, wooden sign hanging from the schoolhouse with the words Oldfield School written on it in faded letters. But there was something else on the sign. Something that made us want to run as fast as we could in the opposite direction. The words "closed since 1962" were written in bold, black letters. We couldn't believe what we were seeing. How could this be? We had just dropped off our daughter at a school that didn't even exist anymore. As we stood there, frozen in fear and confusion, we heard footsteps behind us. We turned around to see the bus driver approaching us slowly, a sinister grin on his face. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You don't know what you've gotten yourselves into." He reached out and grabbed Emma by the arm, pulling her away from us. We tried to fight back, but he was too strong. He dragged her towards the schoolhouse, and we followed, knowing that we had to save her. As we entered the schoolhouse, we could feel the chill in the air. The walls were covered in peeling paint and cobwebs, and the floorboards creaked beneath our feet. We heard a faint whisper coming from somewhere deep inside the school, and our hearts raced with fear. We continued to follow the bus driver until we came to a large room with a dusty chalkboard at the front. The desks were covered in spider webs, and there was a strange, musty smell in the air. The bus driver shoved Emma into a chair and turned to face us. "Welcome to Oldfield School," he said, his eyes glinting with malice. "You're not going to leave here alive." We tried to run, but the door was locked. We were trapped. The bus driver started to laugh, a twisted, guttural sound that made our skin crawl. And then, suddenly, the lights flickered on, revealing a group of children standing in the shadows. Their eyes were hollow and lifeless, and they were all wearing tattered school uniforms from the 1960s. The bus driver walked towards us, his hand outstretched, and we knew that this was it. We were going to die. But then, out of nowhere, Emma stood up and kicked the bus driver in the shin. He stumbled backwards, giving us just enough time to grab her and run towards the door. We ran through the hallways of the school, dodging the ghostly children as they tried to grab us. And then, just as we thought we were going to make it out alive, we heard a loud, bone-chilling scream. It was coming from Emma. We turned around to see her being dragged back into the classroom by the ghostly children, her arms outstretched and her eyes filled with terror. We tried to save her, but it was too late. The door slammed shut, and we were left alone in the dark, with nothing but the sound of our own terrified breathing. We knew then that we were never going to see our daughter again. And we knew that we were never going to be the same. We were forever changed by the horrors of Oldfield School. We stumbled out of the schoolhouse and into the bright daylight. It felt like a completely different world outside, with the sun shining and the birds chirping. We looked around, disoriented and traumatized, and saw a police car parked nearby. We ran over to it, shouting and waving our arms frantically. The police officers looked at us skeptically, but we told them everything that had happened, desperate for someone to believe us. To our surprise, one of the officers listened intently, his face growing pale as we recounted our story. He told us that he knew about Oldfield School and that it had been abandoned for years. He also revealed that there had been reports of strange happenings in the area, with sightings of ghostly children and a malevolent bus driver. He promised to investigate further, but we knew deep down that there was little hope of finding our daughter alive. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. We tried to move on with our lives, but the memory of Oldfield School haunted us constantly. Every time we closed our eyes, we saw the ghostly children and the twisted grin of the bus driver. We heard Emma's screams echoing through our minds, a constant reminder of our failure to save her. One night, we received a package in the mail. It was a small, weathered book, with the title Oldfield School scrawled across the front in faded ink. We opened it nervously, unsure of what to expect. Inside, we found a collection of newspaper clippings and journal entries, all detailing the history of the school and the strange occurrences that had taken place there. As we read through the pages, we began to understand the true horror of Oldfield School. We learned about the tragic fate of the ghostly children and the malevolent bus driver who had trapped them there for eternity. But most chillingly of all, we came across a journal entry from a young girl named Emma who had attended the school in the 1960s. In her entry, she described a terrifying encounter with the bus driver who had dragged her into the school and left her to die. As we read her words, tears streaming down our faces, we knew that this was our daughter. And we knew that she was still trapped in the endless nightmare of Oldfield School. We vowed to never forget her, to never stop searching for her. And we knew that we would always be haunted by the horrors of that fateful day when our daughter went on her bus for her first day of school.